I know. Trevor, is there a handout related to the?
No, because we think it's our one page.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I, there's sometimes 80 degrees and
Yeah.
It's funny, but yeah, of course, brother and I got married upstairs.
They've been everywhere. I think we've got in my neighborhood because the mosquito.
Do we read minutes for Misty? It's just, there was an.
Oh, yeah, Des said yeah, there's some traffic too, so that's fine.
Great.
Okay.
It's exciting. That's what I love. I'm going where I sit. So I don't know if you heard, but we're gonna, I said, it is just probably right after everybody. It was, I have a 6 and 7 little girls and we're at this area for 3 nights. They look like they had chicken pox.
So there might have been a narrative that slipped out that there's a discussion about capping pharmacies on this, but we got some emails from patients today that said that there's, so we've replied to them and said, no, this agenda says capping pharmacy ownership. This, so there's that.
Misunderstanding that the idea about what's going on with that.
JD. So we got a couple of emails today from patients saying that the concern that they were talking, that the board was talking about capping pharmacies. And so we
You're right.
tried to correct them. We said, no, it's a capping pharmacy.
Yes,
Sorry, you gotta sit
even
down.
with folks that are in the know, we've had to explain that one, so we'll make sure to let them know.
You just want to go, no, they're already capped. Yes, if the law says that's, but what they're talking about is.
Probably shouldn't panic at this point.
The panic should have been 4 years ago.
I'll bring it up.
Hey, how are you? How are you doing?
Goodness, how are you? Good.
How, are we starting right now? Well, then I'm gonna pretend like we're only waiting for this thing. I'm gonna go back. It's driving for 2.5 hours.
If you can speak about.
I was born in Gunnison.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Small town, and I lived there. Yeah, and then I graduated. I got
Right.
most of 20 years since we went to the New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a different occasion to do it a little bit. When did you come see my junior?
Had 92. Yep, my dad was there. He passed.
There.
Yep.
Just drove through it recently. I haven't spent much time in Denison. You know, kind of know it because there's a prison
There,
there,
yeah,
right?
well, my dad was the dentist.
There you go.
so.
We had some.
So did your dad work at the prison or contract?
He did, yeah, he was, yeah. Well, he used to, before the Gunnison was actually built, he was driving the Draper
Oh,
once a
wow.
week
Oh, wow.
to be there on their dentist there. And so then, once they built that, one, he kept his family practice and his practice there.
No, I think
That's
this is all
yeah.
mention of MCPAB emails where anyone can send public comments. I think that's all we intended.
He didn't have to relocate either. They relocated to him.
I don't know if
Yes.
he had any swear.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
Yes.
But it's just ironic, right?
Not make that mistake again.
Double check. I was down visiting some Tory.
Okay, yeah.
Came up north.
JD, it may be good to mention if someone wants to make a comment, it's participating digitally or in person, how they do that,
Yep,
right?
yep, and that's.
You don't have to read the whole thing,
Yeah,
but
I was just gonna say.
Yeah. just make sure people know that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's fine.
Yeah.
We're doing like an economic study down there to see if they can expand the prison.
Oh, yeah.
If there's enough people down there that can staff it.
To staff it, right?
I'd be surprised, but haven't grown much
Yeah.
since the prison, I think, arrived in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
It's the current prison.
Right there.
Well, I think
Next
both,
capacity, or
you know
just
what I mean?
people?
Yeah, I think both, yeah,
Okay.
so, you know, but there's some benefit to expanding outside of that.
Right back. Yeah.
Jobs, people down there that want to stay there.
Hi, how are you?
Things are
Different
good.
arrangement today.
Yes,
For
particularly
sound
access for
purposes,
people,
I
that, like
understand.
their family members
need
are
to
there. and
Yeah.
maybe Southern Utah
Centralized.
Yeah,
folks.
or just in general, so
Things
you know,
and
you don't have all your.
Makes perfectly good sense.
Wide on Wasatch.
Yeah.
I hope it online, so is it working? Yeah. Oh,
Which one?
the access code is on PDF. There's like 2 attendees on the webinar ID. Meaning that you.
But you need it from the most current agenda on the.
No, it was just from the PDF document.
Here, I can show you real, Chris, if you wanna. There.
Memos.
That URL.
Right.
Or that I.
Because there should be a.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good.
Yeah.
I guess I can.
Yeah.
No, you're fine, you're fine. I was just looking at these today. Yeah, instead of lugging this thing around all the time. That's true.
Yeah.
The more stuff they give you, the more stuff.
Okay, thank you. I just.
Wi-Fi.
Plenty of boards.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was like, it's
I think you're
gonna be
ready.
doing cabinet, like I nodded the
It's a
cabinet.
public.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. And call this meeting to order. I see that we have a quorum present, so we can go ahead and proceed. I'm the board chair, JD Lauritsen. I appreciate everybody being here today for the third installment of the Medical Cannabis Policy Advisory Board, meeting. I do want to take a second to just give, read some guidelines regarding, providing public comment. For those making, a public comment over Zoom, please make sure that you are using the appropriate webinar link with the appropriate meeting ID. The public chat will be disabled during the board meetings, and only the host will be able to see your comments. The chair will indicate when it is time, myself, for public comment period. When the public comment portion of the meeting begins, you don't raise your hand on Zoom. Instead, send a message in the chat that will go directly to the host of the meeting. The chair will indicate when it's your turn to speak and will allow you to turn on your microphone and camera. You'll have 2 minutes to make your comment. If you're in the room and you'd like to make public comment, please sign in on the public comment sign-in sheet that I believe is on that table over there, near the door. The chair will indicate, of course, when it's time for public comment. The chair will tell you when it's your turn. And again, you'll have 2 minutes to make your comment. So, without further ado, I guess we can turn to the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Have all the.
We just have one thing to add. Misty just let us know that we accidentally got her title wrong. And we'd like to amend it for Dr. Smith, and that's the only change.
Wonderful. Did anyone else have any other potential changes to the minutes from last month's meeting? Okay.
Chair, I make a motion to approve the minutes of August 2023.
Do we have a second?
I will second that.
All right, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor to approve the minutes for the Medical Cannabis Policy Advisory Board meeting from Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved and passed and seconded and all of that. All right, that'll turn us to item number 3 on the agenda, which is just the administrative business of the board. We don't have it too much today. We do want to make sure to mention to folks online as well as those in the room, if you do want to submit any type of position statement in writing to the board, for consideration on any of the issues, please do so by sending it to MCPAB@utah.gov. Of course, the earlier that you can submit it, the better. As you can see, we have a nice thick stack of materials to review ahead of each meeting. And the sooner you get something, submitted, probably the more, more thought and analysis that can go into it, as well as any feedback and additional conversation. So please feel free to do that. We've actually had a few submitted for this meeting. And I can't speak for anyone else, but I do think that, in my opinion, they were helpful. So Yeah, I guess with that, we'll turn it over to Rich, or Mr. Oborn and Dr. Forsythe, as the agenda says, for, meeting updates.
Great. I just had a few items that I wanted to share. Just by way of information for the industry and others who may be interested, we are working with our vendor for configuring the new medical cannabis software. That's an ongoing project. We are pleased to let you know that we successfully completed sprint 1, and there was a demo that was done that went really well. And that is a demo of just the absolute basics of what the contracted vendor AST is putting together. And so we had that demo on September 8th and it went well. We're also working on the critical data integrations that will be of critical importance to the success of the project. And those are ongoing. That's ongoing work. So and we're now in sprint 2. So just wanted to provide an update on that. And we're on track and excited about what's happening with that project. Tomorrow I'll be doing a presentation to the Utah Prosecution Council. And that is I think a group of stakeholders that we have a need to really reach out to and educate and field questions from, as they are a lot of the prosecutors that are dealing with some of the cases that are coming up in local law enforcement related to medical cannabis possession. And so, and thanks to JD for providing some input about that presentation. That was helpful as board chair. Also, just as an update for statistics, there are now 72,400 active medical cannabis cards issued, and that's as of the end of last month, as of the end of August. So, and then we're at about 950 qualified medical providers. Also, there's a Cannabis Research Review Board meeting coming up on October 10th. And at that meeting, the board will be considering evidence and studies related to the treatment of Crohn's and ulcerative colitis using medical cannabis. And then also they'll be considering an update to MS treatment guidelines. So anyone as a physician or just as a patient who's interested in learning more about what the CRB will be considering during that meeting, all of the handouts are already posted on the agenda, with the agenda on the public notice website. And just as a reminder to everyone, it's a good idea if you're coming to this meeting or to Cannabis Research Review Board meetings to subscribe to the public notice website and to ensure that you get the automated updates, because anytime we add a handout or if we change the agenda, you'll be notified in an automated fashion. And you don't need to worry about, reaching out and getting everything, because you will always be updated over time. So those are just a few items I wanted to share with the board.
Excellent. Thanks, Rich. Dr. Forsythe.
So just a couple updates on the same data project, but on the agricultural end of things. We're working mostly with processors and cultivators on the implementation of the system. Well, I guess also with pharmacies. So all the licensees on implementing our side of the system. We're very appreciative of those who've been involved in that process. Having input from the cultivators, processors, and pharmacies is critical to getting a good system that's going to work for everybody. So for those of you who have attended, we appreciate it. And for those that might have interest in the future, we would encourage you guys to reach out, get involved in those meetings so that we can, develop a really good system that's going to work for everyone in the program. There was a outage yesterday with MJ Freeway, the current data vendor. It's back up and running now, to what we understand. And it was a problem with AWS, not MJ Freeway directly. But obviously still a big pain for the producers in Utah, and we definitely have our eyes on keeping those kind of things to a minimum. But, anytime those things go out, it's important that we have backup plans so that pharmacies can continue selling to patients and getting them the medication they need. And that's a big priority for the new system as well. Other than that, we've had an increase in the number of complaints recently from patients about mold in flour. And so it's probably something that the board should be aware of and keep track of. That's it.
All right, thanks for the updates. Turn it back over to you, Rich, for the proposed amendments to R 383-1 through R 383-14.
Great. Abby, can you present that presentation? Great. And my eyes are bad today. And so I'm gonna turn around and hopefully that picks up the audio still. Would you go back to the first slide? Great. So these are some proposed rules that we are asking the board to review and provide any input on. And these are, I'll go into detail on the next slide here, a little bit more detail. You advance that. Okay, so these rules were filed on, or rule amendments were filed on September 15th. I would describe these as a lot of them are non-substantive. Others are substantive, but they don't have significant impact on the industry or patients, but they're still very important for stakeholders to be aware of. So on this document and also on the handout that's posted on the public notice website, there is a link to the actual Utah State Bulletin where these changes can be reviewed in detail, and those are pages 54 to 102. And there's a lot of pages just because there's a lot of rules, and you'll learn a little bit later in my presentation why so many had to be amended. But October 2nd, 2023 will be a formal public hearing. That's at 9 a.m. Mountain Standard Time in this building in room 1020C. And at that meeting, the public and stakeholders will have an opportunity to share any comments or concerns or support for the changes. And then October 16th, that is the deadline for the public to submit any written comments regarding those amendments. And then at the earliest, the proposed rules and repeal of some rules will become effective on October 23rd, 2023. That isn't saying that it'll become effective that day. That's just the absolute earliest possible it can become effective. Okay. So I wanted to begin by just addressing the proposed rule repeals. And these are rules that are being completely removed from the administrative code. The first one relates to agreements with tribes, and that is just being repealed due to House Bill 72, which moved the medical cannabis licensing authority to the Department of Agriculture and Food. So DHHS now has no need to be party to a potential agreement with the tribe. And the statutory authority related to all of that is now under ag statute. So we just have no longer need for that particular rule. That's why that's being done. And then on R 383-12, this is being repealed just because DHHS now has hearing procedures that apply to actions and meetings that all of DHHS is having. So we don't need one that will be specific to the Center for Medical Cannabis. So the hearing procedures, once all this becomes effective, would be found in R 497-100. That's where that would be established in the future, because this particular rule is being rebuilt. Okay, next slide. So here is a list of the proposed rule amendments. And so you'll notice that there's a few numbers skipped, and where a number is skipped, that's just the case of where there was a non-substantive amendment which pretty much means that in this case, it's just a change of a statutory citation because all of the statutes related to the Utah Health Code and the medical cannabis program were recodified during the last legislative session. So, great, go to the next one. Okay, so here's some examples of the very simple rule amendments that happened. All medical cannabis related definitions appearing in the DHHS administrative rules, they moved to R383-1 definitions. So in the past, if there was a definition in medical cannabis pharmacy rules, that definition would appear in the medical cannabis pharmacy rules. But what we've done is we've moved all of the medical cannabis related rule definitions to R383-1, because the only purpose of that rule is definitions. And that way, the industry and stakeholders can know that is the place to check if there's any medical cannabis definition related to DHHS for rules that would be found there. So they can see everyone at once. And then just as I said before, the references to Title 26, Chapter 61A, those are replaced with new statutes to the recodification that we went through in Senate Bill 40 that passed during the last session. And then also there's a lot of phrasing and small grammar corrections and updates made throughout. And most of them were made just so language could align with some rule writing standards that the state has. Okay, go to the next one. All right, so this is a topic we already talked about, but we just moved all the definitions to R383-1 for the next one. Related to the EVS, or electronic verification system. In this one, we again moved definitions from there to R383-1. So R383-2 no longer has definitions. Next, related to qualified medical providers. R383-4, this was amended again because there were definitions that we took out and moved over to R33-1. And go to the next slide. And then R33-5, dosing guidelines. What we did was here we removed a section or a paragraph because there was a bill that passed that was related to the state's central patient portal medical provider. That term was used previously, but we removed that because we determined that it was unnecessary for DHHS to employ a medical provider like a physician or a pharmacist that would support the program, and felt like that was unnecessary. So it was removed from the statute. So we removed reference to that from that particular rule. And then medical providers, R383-6, what we're proposing there is that, again, definitions were taken out. And then also there was a section that was deleted due to renewal notice requirements. And we just put them in one location, so it really didn't change anything substantive. We just streamlined the way the rule was written. And then R383-7, medical cannabis pharmacies. This was amended to include definitions. Again, they were moved from this rule to the other one. And then also R383-7-3, paragraph 8, that related to ownership change requirements. That was deleted because it conflicts with the statute that became effective in July, that is now under Department of Agriculture. And so the ownership change requirements are now all in statute, and there's no need for us to have anything further in our rule. And also the authority over pharmacies went over to ag under that legislation that became effective on July 1, 2023. So that all is unnecessary now. And then also in the medical cannabis pharmacies, we had a removal of the requirement that a patient sign a non-disclosure agreement on request by a medical cannabis pharmacy prior to obtaining a product certification of analysis from a medical cannabis pharmacy. We just felt like this was unnecessary. A patient should be able to get that certificate of analysis, even if the pharmacy, even if they were to refuse to sign something like that. It wouldn't matter. We would want them to be able to get access to it no matter what. So that's what that addresses. And then R33-715, this adds the term lockup to clarify that the pharmacy may sell products using lockup service at pharmacy location. That's not done at every location, but some locations wanted to offer that option. So that's been changed. And then also R33-718, this modifies standards for posting information about the concentration of each cannabinoid product contained, or each cannabinoid contained in this product. This just makes it so pharmacists choose to have the concentration appear as a percentage instead of milligrams. And it just makes it easier for customers to understand the amount of THC in the medical product that's posted online. So this is all just relating to the posting of information online and what patients can access about a particular product. This isn't talking about later, it's only talking about information that's posted online. Okay, next one, R33-8. This just relates to a time frame that was changed in the statute in the Senate Bill 137, and there are questions about that. People can reach out to our office. And then the statutory amendment also prompted the need to change the time frame within which an agent must renew their agent card. So if someone is, their agent card expires on January 1st, 2023, and if they renew that card within 5 days, by the 5th, they don't need to reapply, they just renew. But if it goes beyond the 5 days, then they do need to reapply and do a new background check. And the reason why for that is that the federal criminal background check service, they don't allow us to keep fingerprints for that long, for a year. They say it's reasonable to set it at 5 days. So that's why that's changed. And then R33-9, this allows a courier to store a medical cannabis pharmacy's undelivered medical cannabis shipment for 10 days. There was a statute that changed that allows that. And actually the citation for that, I believe, is now in ads law, because they're now the couriers. So that citation just needs to be updated, it's cited there. But this particular rule stated that a courier cannot store medical cannabis, but in reality, they are related. They are able to do it for 10 days. If a product is undeliverable, then that courier under the statute could store that for up to 10 days. As they attempt to re-deliver it. And then the proposed amendment addresses this conflict and removes a certain section due to that concern. All right. And then this is just continued about delivering couriers. So SB 137, it removed the provision allowing an applicant to renew a courier agent card. And this just, rather than pharmacy agents, we're now talking about couriers. Same reason why we had to change this is existed with pharmacy agents. We're changing it for couriers as well. If they allow their courier license to expire for more than 5 days, they do need to reapply and be background checked again. Also, there's just a movement from one section to another, requirements that relate to home delivery service to consolidate and simplify language that really doesn't change the policy. It's just putting similar requirements in the same section. Okay. Let's move on. This relates to the compassionate use board. This is just repealed, but it's reenacted with new language. Just because we had to clarify the expedited review process and what happens if DHHS denies the request for expedited review of a petition submitted to the compassionate use board. That's what that relates to. And next slide, administrative penalties. This just moved definitions from this section to R33-1, like we mentioned before. That's all. Next slide. And then our contact information is available there. So there may be questions. I'm happy to answer those. And anyone is able to go and review the Utah State Bulletin and review the actual literal language. Like attorneys like to do. They are welcome to go take a look at that, or anybody actually. And we can, and again, there will be a public meeting in October, on October 2nd, when anyone will be able to share their thoughts and ask questions beyond today. And that concludes my presentation.
Thanks for that.
Thanks for the presentation. I do have a procedural question just in relation to our board duties. It seems like to this point, all proposed rules or draft rules have come before us before they've appeared in the bulletin. What's your understanding of that requirement? I mean, the way I read this, and it could be open to interpretation, is it says we'll review any draft rule that is authorized under this, under this chapter, which is, Title 4, 41A. Is it different in this instance? Because in other instances, they brought draft rules before us to see before it's gone in the bulletin. The bulletin to me no longer suggests a draft. The bulletin to me suggests we are in the rulemaking process. So just trying to get some clarity there, and because we just haven't seen that before, with any rules coming before the board.
Sure, it's a fair question. And this being a brand new board that began meetings in July, we had to get this internally approved through our executive office and expedite it through in order to get things in place to meet deadlines related to the legislative session. And so because of that, we made the decision to share it at this board meeting. And we also knew that there wasn't major significant modifications that were being made. A lot of the amendments being made in these rules are just purely non-substantive, recodification. And also I had gotten input from various stakeholders prior to as we were drafting the rules informally prior to when the board was created. So that was why we decided to move forward. In the future, when we begin the rulemaking process, we will ensure that we do involve the board at an earlier stage in that filing. And this is the first, or one of the first filing of rules. It was there were a number of rules that had to be modified, and we knew it would take a lot of board time if they were to review it thoroughly. And we emphasize the fact that it is non-substantive, most of the changes. So you're welcome to take the time to review it and ask questions. There will be a public hearing, and if there's something critical that needs to be modified, those modifications can still be made. And also, one thing we also realized that I think is relevant is the fact that these rules will likely, some of them will only be in place for a brief period, those that relate to pharmacies and pharmacy agents and couriers, because of the fact that AG is already working on their own amendments that will incorporate the pharmacy, the courier, the pharmacy agent rules in their own rule filings. So those were some factors we considered as we made that decision.
Okay.
I do have a question on there. So, I mean, really the only kind of change I saw was like the pharmacy agent renewals or courier renewals. Is that in line with the Department of Ag?
Yes.
So when the transition's over, there won't be any changes that can interfere with them getting their cards?
I believe so. Cody,
Yeah, our agent's already 5 days on that because of the FBI's
Yeah.
requirements, that thing, so there shouldn't be anything. And as I get to my presentation about it, I'll go into a little bit more detail on things, but we're pretty much gonna copy and paste everything.
And just for the board, so you guys understand, it's not, you don't have 5 days to renew. You have
Right.
30 days prior to your
Right.
expiration.
Right,
date
you're
to-
notified.
To apply for renewal, and if you fail to get in time, then if after 5 days, then you have to go through a full period. So just.
Yeah, the FBI does not want us seeing people's background checks if they're not licensed underneath
Correct.
one sort or another, so.
Thank you, Rich.
Sure. And, you know, one option the board could take is at the next meeting, if you wanted to vote on it, then you could do that, and, you know, what's required by the statute is that the board review the rules. And if you choose to, you could make a board vote or not, that's up to the board.
Yeah, how are the other members of the board feeling? I mean, I haven't had a chance to read all of these things yet. I'm not sure anyone else has. Do we feel comfortable? I'm not sure I necessarily feel comfortable, you know, giving the thumbs up or thumbs down today, not having reviewed them, but if it's possible for us to still review them at the other meeting and any changes we might recommend can still be considered and made. You know, I think that's how I would, you know, I think that seems more preferable, but I
Sure.
hear from the rest of the group.
I would like to go over them.
Okay,
I think there's no harm in tabling it until the next.
yeah. So do we need a motion to table? Or
We do.
When's our next meeting?
Third Tuesday in October.
Says the deadline for public to submit written comments to October 16th.
So the after.
So it'd be after that. Is that affecting our ability to make recommendations?
So at the earliest, it could become effective then. So we can always, and this often happens, we'll delay implementation for whatever reason. It's easy to do.
Okay.
And if it's something that relates to like pharmacy or pharmacy agent or courier, what we do is just turn to ag and have them incorporate whatever thing needs to be tweaked.
Yeah, and in talking to Cody earlier, it sounds like we're probably gonna be doing the same exact thing with your rules. We'll hear your presentation today. We'll get to see a copy of them at some point, you
Right.
know, and then we can provide that input. So, yeah, I mean, happy to take a motion to table if that's how we feel, so.
All right, Mr. Chair, I make a motion to table the DHHS proposed amendments on rule R383-1 through R383-14.
Do we have a second? Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of tabling the proposed amendments to R383-1 through R383-14, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Thanks, Rich. And I guess with that, we might as well just go ahead and turn it over to Cody for his presentation. It will probably have a very similar outcome.
Yeah, so Cody James, Deputy Director of the Industrial Hypomedical Cannabis Program for the Utah Department of Ag and Food. Similar to this situation, we're just talking about really some non-substantive changes to rules as we bring pharmacies over to the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. As you saw in Rich's presentation, DHHS has about 14 total rules that they were overseeing with pharmacies, and they're going to continue to oversee the majority of those. As we went through our review of those rules and what needs to come up over to the Department of Agriculture and Food, there's really only 4 rules that we're looking at. That would be R383-1, which was the definitions, R383-7, which is medical cannabis pharmacies, and then R383-8, which is the pharmacy agents. And as those that are familiar with our rules know that we do things a little bit differently rule-wise. We put everything that is contained in a certain type of licensure or type of rule in that. So for instance, our process rules or the process rules, our grower rules with that, we're gonna do the same thing with the pharmacy rules, pretty much combining 380.3.1, 7 and 8 into one rule, and then another rule being home delivery and couriers. Overall, the substantive changes are actually not there at all. These are just a cut and paste of what DHHS has. There are some drafts that I did send over that are about finished. The only things that we're going through right now is making sure that the citations from statute are matching. Not only did Department of Ag and Food bring over pharmacies, which added to our statutory citations, but Department of Health and Human Services had some changes to theirs as well, so we've got to make sure those all match. If there's an example, I did send some over, don't know if you've been able to see that, but pretty much, I highlighted where it's supposed to be changed to 4-41A, things like that, so. Really, there's the other changes that you may see in that, other than the citations, is things that we either had rule-making authority or had rules for already, such as the tribal agreement, as well as the administrative penalties aspect. We've already had those in our rules. There was no need to have two of those. So we decided to remove those types of rules out of that at all. Again, just bringing three or four over to us. There were a couple things that we do believe that needed to be removed from these rules, just because they're either already in statute or actually went against statute. One would be in our pharmacy rule that was actually allowing for partial billing to take place at pharmacies, and based on the testing statute and the testing rules, that's actually not allowed to do that. So it's something we would like maybe revisit in the future, but right now we don't want our rules to conflict with our statute at this time, so we can get these things passed. And then secondly, the change, and this was added to statute, there was some business name and logo standards, where, there was a list of things that pharmacies wouldn't be able to use in their names, such as Weed, Pot, Reaver, Mary Jane, things like that. That's actually been moved into statute, so we don't believe that it needs to be in two places. Other than that, it's a complete copy and paste, other than, again, those citations that referring to 441A or the new DHHS statute. And then secondly, there's going to be a second rule that we bring up, which is just for home delivery and couriers, which is currently 383-9. There's a couple of changes there that we're going to be bringing definitions over to that, but making it pretty much the same definitions as what is in the pharmacy rule, but we'll be removing those that don't need to be used twice and that actually don't have to have anything, that don't have anything to do with home delivery or courier services. And I think that's, other than that, it's just citations in that aspect there. So really straightforward and simple. Are looking at, DHHS has shared their rules that they've just talked about with us, so we can make sure that the citations are matching too, so we don't have to keep changing those. And then any substantive changes, we'll obviously come back in the future if we see any need for that. We're on a bit of a timeline, as Rich mentioned, after statute changes, we have 180 days to get those rules into effect. So we're looking at December to get that, and without any real substantial changes, that really being a cut and paste. We're hoping that the advisory board gives us that advice to move forward. Any questions?
So do you guys plan to do the same thing that they've kind of done, is put it into the bulletin and move the process along?
Yeah, that's just time wise, and really, again, that there's not, I mean, it's the same stuff that they've had, that we don't see that's a change, so it's real non-substantive in our mind. Yeah, just timelines, and because it's about a 60-day process to get those into effect by the time January comes around, we really gonna move forward.
Do you feel confident you guys will be able to get us a full version of all the rule changes prior to next meeting and within a week before the next meeting, so we can have a chance to actually review it?
I hate making promises there, but because all of a sudden I get stuck with meetings, but yeah, our hope is to have that ready to go next week, and we can get that to you as soon as possible. But it really comes down to the citations, and it's just making sure, and as we all know, going through every single statute, making sure it's the right number. Not only tedious, but not fun either. So
certainly. I would propose that we handle it the same way we plan to handle the DHHS rules. And table it for now, review it prior to the next meeting, and then provide any sort of, feedback or take action at the next meeting. If anyone feels otherwise, please speak now and let me know. Okay, well, nothing else. We'll take a motion on it if anybody wants to make one.
Make a motion to table the pharmacy and courier rules as presented.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of tabling the pharmacy and courier rules as they were presented today, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, we are now going to kind of go a little bit out of order here. We're going to actually have the discussion regarding business tax decoupling right now. So with that, I will turn it over to Trevor for his portion of the presentation. And then we can have board discussion and then public comment. So Trevor, take it away.
Thank you, JD. So because of the esoteric nature of tax reform, Jason Gardner, who's the Director of Policy Planning and Public Affairs for the Utah Tax Commission, graciously wrote a memorandum for the board, which I believe was posted early Monday morning. And he's here in person to help walk through the two primary options, which are tax credits, which were presented in the 2023 legislative session, and the idea of decoupling from the federal tax code. So Jason, if you're willing to come on up, I'll turn it over to you. And if you're willing to go ahead.
Of course, absolutely. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. And I want to say right off the bat that the tax commission has no opposition whatsoever to a benefit we provide to the industry to put them on par and offset the impacts of the 280E treatment at the federal level. Our only position is how to do that and how to do it in an administratively efficient way. So to be very clear that that's our position. So when we were approached last session about how to do this, we were asked at that very time what would be the most efficient way. So we brainstormed, we looked at deductions, we looked at credits, we looked at all the different pros and cons of each, and we proposed the credit option. What you saw in the bill was actually the result of our work in the last session. The reason we did that is because Utah, a little bit of a history lesson, in 2010, Utah had deductions prior to 2010. The legislature took a position to repeal the vast majority of our deductions other than the ones that were specifically required by federal law, and shift those policy directions that they still wanted to offer benefits to industry, shift those into tax credits. When they did that, they made it easier for us to administer because what we're able to do is we're able to leverage federal might, if you will, federal resources to be able to audit deductions. We no longer had to audit deductions because deductions were all handled at federal level. Because of that, our staff is actually fewer now than it was in 2010, even though our population is more than doubled and our revenue is more than tripled. So it's a substantial benefit to the state financially for us to be coupled to the feds. What we were trying to think of is a credit, and we understand that a deduction would be more specific to specific industries. But we see this as an issue that is moving at the federal level. And if we go the deduction route here in Utah, we are going to incur all of those costs, the upfront costs that come with decoupling. Then if the feds were to decouple, or sorry, not decouple, reschedule cannabis, then all of that work would be for naught. All that money spent would be for naught, because our rolling formula that we have here in Utah would automatically adopt that treatment here in the state of Utah. So if, as soon as that happens at the federal level, which we kind of hope that it would, because it takes this whole argument off, there's no reason for this argument anymore, then we have no issue anymore. The credit we view as an interim between that now until that eventuality, which we do see as an eventuality. Enough states in the country are moving this direction. The support of cannabis is moving in that direction nationally, worldwide even. And so we were thinking of a way that could provide a benefit to the industry to offset the cost to the industry of federal treatment, but do so with the minimal upfront cost to the state. The benefit of that is, let's face it, every bill has a fiscal note, and that's its number one burden that it has to overcome. When we use decoupling, what's going to happen is there's going to have to be an administrative cost associated with administering those deductions. We don't have any deductions now, which means we're going to have staff that review those deductions. We don't have any expertise on what are ordinary expenses for the cannabis industry. It's not something we've ever done in the past, so we have to gain that expertise. We would incur all of that, and that would reduce the amount that can be funded directly back to the industry. A credit has zero overhead. There's no cost to the state to administer a credit because, especially the credit as we designed it, it's calculated directly on Utah taxable income. So there's no reason to verify expenses for us. And so in our view, then you end up with 100% of the benefit in the fiscal note going to the industry. And we feel like there's those pros, plus the temporary sort of nature of it, argues in favor of a tax credit.
And that would be like more individual to each pharmacy, right? So.
Correct.
Okay.
So what we would do is we're in the process of doing this right now, actually. We're in the process of pulling the returns of every person who would benefit from this particular deduction, looking at the disallowed deductions on the federal level and determining what an appropriate credit would be to offset the cost of those disallowed deductions. And what we can do is we would recommend a percentage for the tax credit, which creates the same benefit to the industry as a deduction would. It, of course, looks at averages, right? Like it would look at the average credit for the industry. So those benefit, those industry or those businesses that run a really slim business and have very little expenses, they would benefit a little bit more than those businesses that have very high expenses. But on whole, the industry would be made whole. And so,
Would you
to the
reevaluate-
extent that the average is accurate, then that would be.
And you would reevaluate that every year or just once, and then like how often do you reevaluate that?
We can reevaluate that on an ongoing basis, but that would have to be put in the statute, right? The way the bill was drafted before was a one-time thing. If you wanted to put it a reevaluation, that's definitely something that can do. So, yeah, I mean, that essentially, as the industry grows, right now we have a very small industry, and so it makes it easy to analyze that. But of course, as I said, this is the forefront, right? This industry is expected to grow nationwide in the state of Utah, and so obviously the administrative burden of that, the amount of returns we have to look at to find the average would increase. So maybe a sampling in the future, once it becomes a very large number, might be more appropriate, but.
I do have a question though.
Of course.
We know that a bunch of states have decoupled.
Yes.
And we talked about this earlier. You've not found one that has a similar tax structure to Utah?
Not as us, because we, like I said, that history of Utah making a conscious decision to move away from deductions and go towards credits, that was unique to us. It was based on an analysis of smaller government, really.
So we're the only state that currently does that in the nation?
As far as I know, I haven't exactly looked at every single state, but that's my understanding. One complication that deduction creates in other states I have read are facing this problem with deductions. It's when you take a deduction and the entity taking the deduction as a pass-through entity. So say, for example, the business is being operated as a partnership or an LLC. That deduction flows through to all of their partners in the same percentage. So what it does is it doesn't just decouple at the partnership level, it decouples in every person downstream who's invested in that partnership. So it's it could be a huge magnitude of impact.
Any further board discussion?
I'm happy, JD, to provide a little bit of background as to what other states are doing. So as of now, at least 21 states have gone towards some form of decoupling from the federal tax code, Maine being the most recent last month. But that's a very easy statistic to find, whereas how states have potentially pursued tax credits is much harder because every state has a different tax apparatus. And what I found is that there's a number of states and localities that have pursued tax credits, but not at a broad level for the entire industry. Most states or municipalities that have gone after tax credits generally do it in a social equity program or for specific parts of the industry, like New York has a manufacturing credit, California has a research and development credit, even the city of Berkeley has a dispensary credit. So it's very hard to compare. Everyone's doing decoupling because we don't really know how many people are also doing tax credits because it could be in so many forms.
Of those states that you've looked at that have gone the tax credit route, have you determined how they've analyzed what the credit should be? You know what I mean? Like what, whether it should be 2.1% or 4% or what it should be. Have you found any of that?
Again, it gets quite complicated because each jurisdiction does it in a different way. I do know that Connecticut, they just repealed this in June or July of this year, but they had what was called the angel investor tax, which was a tax credit program that was going to offer annual tax credits of up to $15 million for a $37.5 million investment in a cannabis business in Connecticut, which they claimed was equal or equivalent to a 40% tax credit against Connecticut tax liability. So under Vickers' bill, I believe it's at HB 278, we had a 2.1% credit, which is equivalent to, I believe, 44%.
Yeah, it seems, that's what's one thing that we got a lot of comments on with the bill is 2.1%. People are thinking it in terms of a deduction. That sounds like nothing. But what you have to measure it against is what our tax rate is in Utah. So at 2.1% is against income, just like the 4.65% rate is against income. So essentially, that's over a 40%. It's equivalent to over a 40% deduction, a 2.1. And of course, we don't have any position on where that is laid. I mean, other than the fact that we'll provide our evidence based on what our analysis is, but it's up to the legislature to put that percentage wherever they want to. And I mean, they could put it all the way up to 4.65% if they want.
I got a question, maybe. Do we know if there anybody in the cannabis industry that doesn't have taxable income?
I haven't examined that exactly, but I'm sure there probably is in every industry. There's people that have
Right.
no taxable income.
Because right, that would be where the credit would apply is on your taxable income. So if
Correct.
you didn't have a taxable income, the credit, not a lot of value to go.
You're absolutely right, absolutely right. So it's more similar to that Connecticut credit in the sense that it rewards investment in the state.
And the credit wouldn't carry on year over year, it'd be the following year, correct?
Well, all credits in the state of Utah have a 3-year period.
3-year carrier forward, okay.
And this one, I believe, had one, and I don't have to fill in from, but. Can double check.
Oh, thank you.
And if it didn't have it, we can definitely put that in.
Okay.
Can anybody tell me what the difference is in the fiscal note between decoupling and doing one of these credits? Because I know the decoupling was so big that that's why we weren't able to even move it last year at all.
I don't know what the revenue side of decoupling would be. That's outside my expertise. I do know that there's a staffing side, so depending on how much staff we need to administer a decoupling, remembering, of course, that it's not just the entities themselves, but it's all the individuals, corporations, businesses that are invested in those entities. So it's, I mean, it depends on how much staff. I think you were suggesting 4 staff members for the kind of administration.
Do you remember, Rich, do you remember what the fiscal note was last year? It was like millions, wasn't it?
In your first.
We can bring it up
I
right
can pull that
now.
up right
Yeah.
now.
And you assume that the credit would be much less.
We would assume that the credit would be less, but as far as, like I said, I can't speak to revenue, but I can speak to admin. There'd be 0. In fact, if you look at the bill, this bill here, we put 0 fiscal note on it from an administrative perspective. So, I mean,
Did you find the fiscal note?
Yeah, yep. So it's just talking about the revenues. It was estimated for FY 24 at 1.4 million and at FY 25 at 1.6. Expenditures were 0.
I kind of want to hear what industry has to say about, I mean, since this directly affects them, if there's a preference.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why we'll open it up to public comment, because I know there's some folks here to talk about it. It would be helpful for you and your office to provide us with numbers on what it would cost for the administration of it. Because I think that's probably where some of it's gonna net out, because as I talked to you before the meeting, this is tax money the state of Utah never should have gotten from us as legal businesses. And so it's hard to swallow, not getting deductions like other businesses, but I appreciate, that some of the challenges you all face. So there's no further public or board comment. I would like to open it up to the public, whether online or in the room. So do we have anybody online? Abby? Probably. Okay.
Does anyone have their hand raised to speak?
Yeah, they're supposed to message.
We have a couple people that are commenting. Marianne Waite said that she would like to make a comment. You want to start with her?
Sure, and then we'll turn it over to folks during the room.
The audio is adjusted on the right hand.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you for taking my comment. The chat's still disabled, by the way, so I'm glad you saw me in Q&A. I just wanted to make a comment. I was a little offended by his wording that there's no benefit in decoupling. Yeah, I get that it would be a lot of work to backtrack, but this is something that's been close to the heart of many patients and providers. The cost of the program, as I mentioned last meeting, is exponentially high, and this is one of our big chances to lower the cost of product if we're lucky. I mean, it's a long battle for sure, but I thought it was just a little cold-hearted to say there's no benefit when there's, these businesses can stay in business instead of selling to corporations. They can stay local Utah companies. And the patients would love if we could find a way to, so if this credit's the way to go, that makes a lot of sense. I know things are up in the air federally, but again, this price is number one reason people aren't staying in the program. It's the number one thing I hear every day. It's top of everybody's minds. And, even just a benefit to a patient is a benefit, even if it's a lot of work. There's some value there. And that's all. Thank you.
Diane, do you have anyone else online?
Everyone, thanks for your hard work. I think benefits like this to the patients, we just heard from the patients, are exactly what they need. That's all you need to hear. That's what I asked in my comment, is how does this benefit the patients? Is it directly? Is it through you guys? How does it benefit the patients? If it benefits the patients, it's a yes. Should have been much quicker than that. Let's go.
Thank you, Dick.
Okay, and then Amy King.
Hi, yes, Amy King, KP Services Unlimited. I would second or support both previous commenters about the benefit to businesses to lower that overall tax impact by the way of credits. Could possibly be an incentive to lower product costs for the consumer in the long. But my question, as I posed also in the questions and answers, going back to the early comments of the review and the present scheduling change for push to HHS to schedule to 3. Have we actually verified that 280E falls off for state medical cannabis programs? Because 280E is referring to pharmaceutical development. Cannabis under state medical programs does not fit a Schedule 3 model, and therefore it's possible. So I just wondered, do we actually have verification that transferring to a Schedule 3, which is still a big if, but if it did, would that really remove 280E obligations for state medical cannabis businesses? Thank you.
That is the understanding. Section 280E only applies to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 substances. So whether cannabis truly fits as a Schedule 3 substance, if it's no longer a Schedule 1 or a Schedule 2 substance, 280E does not apply. That's directly from the tax code. That's correct. But thanks for your comments. We appreciate it.
We have one more raising their hands. Zach.
Yeah, hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I was just wondering, I've been in this program for the last 3 years, and the costs are still astronomical. I don't know if there's any way we could lower the fees to the producers or try to limit the bottleneck of the COAs. But just the biggest thing that I think most patients are struggling with is affordable edibles, affordable flower. And if we could focus on a way to either decriminalize or to allow more cultivation, that would be huge for patients like myself. I know the EVS system has gone down multiple times, and you can go to any Rite Aid or any convenience drugstore and get your help, while as we have to wait in this line until 10 o'clock in the morning or a certain time. And it's just, we're really struggling. So whatever you guys can do to limit the bottleneck and to allow true safe access for this medicine, just like an aspirin, just like if people want to have their Coke, Coca-Cola, that is, we need to have the same access to this life-saving medicine. Thanks for your time, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach. Okay, anyone else online?
I can see them.
Okay, we'll take a public comment in the room. Please just go up and sign. And then, I think we'll have you probably take a seat right there and make your public comment.
Wanted to thank the tax division for having a conversation with us. The proposed options, while some do benefit, there's, two different paths to go. Some do benefit other operators, that have more deductible expenses. As a whole, this benefits our industry. It doesn't necessarily make anything cheaper initially. It just allows us as businesses to operate like a regular business. And tax fraud still can apply. So I just want to reiterate that with 280, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're going to be deducting things that shouldn't be deducted. We still have to comply with the federal tax code. So this isn't going to be a free for all. It's going, even though there's no fiscal note, there's not going to be an audit. Tax fraud is still a real thing. So everybody needs to operate with an integrity when they file their taxes. So just want to reiterate that the integrity of the tax code.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comment from in the room? All right, we'll bring it back to the board for any further discussion. Look, I'll just say that I don't think we should give up on decoupling at this point, despite the challenges it may face. A number of other states have moved in that direction. The credit, may be a nice fallback position. And if there's a way to work that credit to as close as possible to what a normal deduction would look like, that might be the direction that we go in, and that might make everyone happy to say, there's a credit. It's not just like deductions, but it's trying to mirror deductions the best we can. I think that might be the best route to go, but I would hate to give up on decoupling, hoping the feds are going to do something. Anyone that's been close to cannabis in any capacity for the last number of years, look, Schedule 3 has some serious implications for the medical cannabis programs across the country. I hope everyone takes those into consideration. We are not an adult use state, right? A lot of the products that people enjoy, flower, and a lot of these different products that have very variable potencies and different things. My man Blake Smith could stand up and probably tell you, Justin Ariola could probably stand up and tell you, a lot of those things are going to go away. And the licenses that are going to be given out go to big pharma, right? And not to the people that are currently in the industry. So Schedule 3, while it does have, some potentially, some things like this as part of it, I do believe it will be more disastrous for the medical cannabis industry than it will be a benefit. So that's why I've always said descheduling over rescheduling. So knowing that that's not a foregone conclusion either, because they say a whole lot of things about cannabis at the federal level to get people to like them or vote for them or whatever. Cannabis is a thing you throw out there when you need something, right? But they've not done anything substantively. And yes, it may be a challenge in the state of Utah to do this. And if there's a commitment to try to be able to work on a credit, if we can't get decoupling, then great. But I would hate to give up on decoupling now. And if it is still a possibility, because we know what the credit is and we can work on the credit if we need to. I'd rather see it as a fallback position. But I'd open it up to the rest of the group for further thoughts if anybody has any.
I just agree with you. I think decoupling, we went to DC this year and worked on it. I think decoupling is the one that makes the most sense. And I think it's the surefire way to get these price cuts down to patients. But also, I'm not going to just say that that's the only benefit. The benefit would also be just a healthier industry as well. But I worry a little bit about the fiscal note. Again, I know that's what kind of derailed us last year. So if we have to fall back on credits, I'd like to know that there's something else out there. I'm glad that was proposed and that we have some more options, but I do think that we need to stay focused on decoupling for now.
Do we know what the difference was? I mean, this is the fiscal note for the credit. Do we know what the fiscal note was for decoupling?
They never proposed it.
They never
The credit
proposed
was all that was proposed. It was proposed late in the session as well. Bajan may be able to
Yeah.
know, because he and his partner Steve have worked on this.
So the main difference between decoupling and credit, decoupling will require fiscal. So if we're thinking pushback from the legislation, it's gonna require an analyst or a full-time employee or something. If we go credits, again, we recommend the decoupling route. Credits, the path of least resistance, and admittedly, our business would benefit more from that as opposed to the decoupling. We have to look at it objectively and just say, call spade a spade. With no fiscal note, path of least resistance, initially would say that would be approved easy. If there is a fiscal note, like we experienced last session, that could do things, but it's my understanding with my partner CPA, speaking with the tax commission, they can get to the same place. So if it's $1,000 credit or $1,000 offset on decoupling, it's just the logistics of, is there a fiscal note, is there credit, because it would require everybody's tax returns to physically be audited by the tax commission, so that's where that extra employee comes in. So if we can't, that's why voice tax fraud is still real, so we go the credit route. Yes, there is, everybody can lie on their taxes now, you're not supposed to. There is the opportunity, if you're committing tax fraud, you're still gonna commit tax fraud, so it's not gonna open the door for more additional fraud. So if you're already a bad actor, you're already a bad actor, but I just want to voice that it's not going to open the door for more tax fraud. We can get to the same place from a monetary perspective. It's just the logistics of getting there. So decoupling versus credit, as the operator, we would receive the same benefit. So we want to think about what would be most effective for this regulatory body and the one at the Hill.
Well, I think with that said, I think that's why we probably want to see how close we
That's
can
what
get. And so I think for now, the recommendation would be to continue to explore decoupling while at the same time, kind of running dual paths to see how close we can get the credit, because if that is eventually gonna just be the same thing, essentially, then we go there. I just would hate to give it up before we see those actual numbers and we get there,
Just
so.
make a data driven decision.
Yes, of course, once we have more information, number one, what it would cost to administer, right, for decoupling, but then how close can we get that credit? Because if it's gonna be the same thing and just a difference in name only, then I think we'd feel more comfortable as industry.
From your credit, you want to make sure you set periodic review, period.
Oh, of course, yeah, and I think that to your point you made, sir, we definitely would want to have something written into the legislation that allows the tax commission to go back or lawmakers to go back and revisit the credit as things evolve and change.
Probably the most efficient way is to just put a study in the actual legislation that requires us to report the legislation on an annual basis.
Okay,
I mean, I don't think, and I can't speak for everyone, but I mean, they're not against allowing businesses that have been given granted legal opportunities to be treated more fair as other businesses, especially when it comes to taxes. I think as far as our position as an advisory board is again, we're advising just the governance group essentially and legislators saying, we recognize there's a hole within this tax model. And we're recommending to them that they continue to view decoupling. However, if that's not on the table at all, and again, this depends how we write this letter and recommend this advice we give them, but applying the tax credit, I think at a minimum, trying to get that approved this next year, whether it's decoupling or what it is a big step in the right direction for this market. So.
Yeah, of course, any further public comment, we'll take it, and then we'll close public comment and come back to the board for potential action.
So Scott Erickson with Standard Wellness and the Utah Cannabis Co-op. My concern with decoupling, I think they're both right, and we should go down both paths. But my concern with the decoupling path is theoretically, the fiscal note should be the same as far as the credit or the decoupling back. But he just mentioned that they would probably need 4 employees. So last year, the fiscal note was 1.4 million. 4 employees at roughly $100,000. By the time you do benefits and everything else, it's another 400,000. So you're looking at about a 30% addition to that fiscal note, which decoupling is probably more accurate. But if we're having a hard time getting a fiscal note of 1.4, we're gonna have a harder time getting a fiscal note of 1.8. So that's my only comment. I think we need to do something on the tax side of things, whether it's decoupling or tax credit. It's what can get through and how do we walk through that process.
Certainly, I don't hear anybody here saying that we're like not gonna take the credit if it comes down to pipeline. If anyone feels that's what's being said, I can tell you, I've not heard that from anyone. I'm just saying, I think we should continue to explore both. And at the same time, there's no harm in having the tax commission do an analysis of what they think it will cost for them to administer decoupling versus how close can we get a credit to what normal deductions and decoupling would look like. I don't think there's any harm in running those dual paths, and I don't think it's necessarily gonna change. You know, if we do determine that we can do decoupling and we think we're gonna go that route, that legislation is gonna have to be written anyways. The credit legislation's already been written, and I'll tell you, I feel like if we can get close enough to what normal deductions look like for businesses, then we're probably in a better spot. So, like I said, I would just hate to give up on decoupling now, and not fully vet both of these ideas, because clearly if 21 states have done this, there's some wisdom to the idea, right? But Utah may face some unique challenges that require a credit. So, with that, we'll close any public comment, come back to the board, any further discussion before we take any action. Okay, well, willing to entertain a motion of some sort on this.
Can I add one more thing, JD? I'm sorry. I was hesitant, but Jason does mention in his memo that historically the legislature prefers tax credits, 9 times out of 10. And it may be worth considering that since the bill is already written under SB 278, if this board makes a decision in the future to support tax credits, that may go much quicker through general session than proposing a new idea, albeit that other states have done it. But there will be many more questions waiting at the Hill, and there's possibly less of a chance of it actually being heard compared to tax credits, which most likely would go through all the way in the 2024 session.
Understood. My mind doesn't change.
And it's a strategic decision.
Of course, and I think what we're saying here though is that we're gonna run dual paths until we can see all of the information, right? And once we have the full information in front of us of what decoupling would truly look like from an administrative cost perspective and those types of things, and then we can say, you know what, that type of fiscal note doesn't have a chance, then we know what the credit looks like, right? But we should be working on both paths. I think to just say, well, this is gonna be easier, this is gonna be the path. Yes, those are all valid points, but at a certain point in time. And I just don't think we're there yet as a board, or just, as an industry, right? I don't think we're prepared today to say, oh, hey, let's just give up on this decoupling. Because we're not saying we're drafting legislation. All we're asking for is just an additional analysis of what the fiscal note will probably look like, right? Because I think that's gonna probably determine a lot of where we go with it. So
what would be the time frame to get that fiscal note? What would be the time frame, do you think, to come back with an analysis?
What we're working on right now, looking at the dislodge reduction on the federal level, so we are kind of estimating that right now. I haven't looked at the actual staffing requirements. I think that will depend on looking at the entities and see how they're structured. If they're structured in a way that there aren't a lot of blowdown of the entities, then they would be smaller than I estimate. I just kind of hold it. But I can work on that probably next year.
Okay, so
yeah,
it could be something that we could have next
the next
meeting.
board meeting. I mean, I think that's reason enough to proceed.
It might be fair to, maybe it's different for the tax commission than it is for all the rest of us, but the fiscal notes do have some change that happens at the legislative session or before that, as that bill gets there. So I mean, what Jason says might be one thing, but what actually comes out for legislative to see is usually a little bit different than what we usually propose. So, yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yes,
Yeah.
The legislative fiscal analyst, then what's the official fiscal note on? All we can say is that we're in.
The number's usually higher than what you tell them.
And sometimes
It's tough to know sometimes, but yeah, it's very rarely exactly what we play.
But at least give us a ballpark figure. Okay. All right. So, a motion from anyone?
Are we just motioning to just defer another vote?
Table it.
I mean, yeah, we probably
Everything
table it to the next meeting, because if he can have that information for us, I think by then, hopefully, we can make a decision between the two.
I'll make a motion to table this, the changes to the decoupling, the two eighty until we get more information.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Yeah, quick. Okay, we have a motion to table, our recommendations on medical cannabis business tax decoupling, to the next meeting in October. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Okay, we're now gonna turn to what was item 7, or excuse me, item 7, which is the changes to R68-29 quality assurance testing on cannabis. I'll turn it over to Cody James, for his presentation.
Yeah, thanks, JD. So this was something that was brought to the board last month, and in hopes for the review. It's really a way to hopefully remove the subjectivity of failing flower products or defined plant products with the number of seeds found in sampling. What the rule that was submitted says is that for any cannabis plant product, the total number of seeds found is greater than the net weight of the sample collected divided by 3.5. And so to simplify that if any 3.5 gram sample has one seed or more, then it would fail. So if it's obviously, as you guys get things sampled, it's a little bit far long or more than that, that's why the division comes into it. So I would turn the time over to Dr. Forsyth, is that's a long-winded way to say that you divide it by 3.5.
Yeah, I think you got the math. We presented this last month in an attempt to get some feedback from the industry, from patients, from all interested stakeholders, really. And so we're here to receive that feedback today before we formally draft a rule and submit it.
One question I do have, Dr. Forsyth, is let's say there's 2 seeds found in one. I mean, I know you take a sizable sample lot. Do you go in and then further inspect those other ones? Is it an average of each package? So if there are 4 gathered 4 units, you'll check all 4?
Yeah.
How thorough?
If we do find some seeds, we go back and take all this material that hasn't already been used for other testing.
Okay.
And go through that as well. It's the same thing with any foreign matter, not just.
Yeah. And then will that be taken into account? Because obviously now you're up to 7 grams or 14 grams, so your 3.5 is still in there.
And that's why we wrote it the way we did, to say of the sample taken, not just of the small portion that we took for testing.
Are you all planning to discern between like mature viable seeds and seed casings and different types of things?
Anything that you can like crush between your fingers wouldn't be counted as a seed.
And then that product will have to be, it will just not be able to be sold.
It wouldn't be able to be sold as flour. If the company opts, they can remediate to modify the form of the plant product.
How often do you think this happens?
We actually do find seed. It's one of the more common complaints from patients when they find seed in their flour.
But so are you worried that then that would lead to another, it being harder to get flour on the shelves because now we're asking to remediate?
I don't know that it's that common that it would cause that, and it's already against the rules. So this is actually more just clarifying the current rule, because we've already failed things for having seed. There's just not a number that it refers to.
I speak all the time. Sorry.
I know, yeah.
And there's, and all those seeds don't weigh that much, obviously, but there's a consumer safety aspect to it as well. There's nothing that says it's unsafe necessarily, but a consumer safety as far as are you getting what you pay for and things like that.
But if you're combusting the seed has oil in it, it's not a pleasant experience to, or partial combustion, we're not allowed full combustion, but partial combustion can release acrid smoke, things like that. So it's more in the best interest of your patients not to have the seed in there.
Now, other than being unpleasant, are you aware of anything that is actually injurious to public health?
In general, the inhalation of acrid smoke is bad for the lungs. I'm not trying to be snarky.
No, this is gonna present, this is just another challenge, for all of us in the industry, and we'll get to you folks in the minute. So this is just another challenge for all of us. 1 seed per eighth it just seems like a pretty small number. And I don't know what the right number is, right? I'm just saying, I don't know if we know what the right number is. And look, we don't want to injure any patients. Obviously, I know you guys have, other concerns about patients taking seeds and cultivating those. That is much more a criminal concern. And I think we have a criminal justice system to deal with that. But that's just kind of what I say is it's just, again, it's gonna make it difficult, and just because cannabis has seeds in it, I don't think necessarily somehow makes it a less quality product or anything. There are a number of really great strains that have come from seed-filled phenos, right? I mean, cherry pie that makes up, as John can speak to this, cherry pie, the original cherry pie that made up the cookie strains, full of seeds, right? So good genetics don't necessarily, always come, free of seeds. And I hope we're not making a statement here today to say if a cannabis product somehow has a seed in it, that somehow it makes it a lesser quality product,
I mean,
and so.
it does by weight.
That's what,
Yeah,
so that's the concern, so by weight,
They're
they're
Yeah, the
getting.
patient's
getting
not
less
getting
product
the same
at that
quantity.
point.
Yeah, but that's assuming you one seed in an eighth.
I found 3 to 5.
Well,
Yeah,
In
understood.
one jar.
Understood. Yeah, no, that's going to happen, right? That's, I
But
mean, I
to
think.
be fair, JD, we don't find like, this wouldn't fail a lot of product that are coming through either of the labs. We don't normally find a great amount of seed.
Oh, understood. No, understood. I'm just making sure that we're, that all opinions, what you're saying, because I know there's some folks in the crowd that are gonna have some things to say, as well. So, any more comment from the board or Rich, do you have any comments, anyone else before we take a public comment? Do we have anyone online, Abby, that would like to comment on this?
Let's see. We have Jake Garn.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, trying to sell seeds at the weight of flour. Come on. Wow. Let's all take a deep breath. Everyone that heard that, every patient, I apologize for that man's statement, mansplaining to you what your value should deliver to your medicine. There's plenty of value to seeds. Yes, there are, if we can plant them in our garden. Thank you for pointing it out, sir.
Yeah, well, anyone else online? Okay.
Lucy, and Lucy, when you speak, if you will, please state your last name for the record.
Hi, my name is Lucy, last name Jem. In that vein, are we gonna talk about the weight that stems add to an eighth as well? Because I don't really hear a lot of people talking about that, and I see stems, just like the occasional seed. So how is bud not supposed to, or is cannabis not supposed to have any of that? That's I'm curious about that.
I think you addressed it, didn't you?
I did talk about stems today, but there are different forms that cannabis can be bought in as flowers, but we really leave the quality of what the patients want up to them in those cases, because it is plant material and where someone considers the thickness of it to be a stem versus just part of the flowering cola. It's hard to determine on our end, but we certainly are, we do understand that there are limited, the part of the plant that's desirable to patients is limited, and different people are gonna have preferences for what part they get.
Okay, and then we have Zach.
Yeah, I just wanted to say as a patient, I've been a consumer of medical cannabis for 26 years. And the Sensimilla, or the without seeds, produces quite a bit more resin, quite a bit more medicinal properties. So with my chronic fatigue and chronic pain, if I am unable to smell or to even notice those terpenes, no matter what the percentages of the THC or CBD, I don't get my relief. So if we can focus on the actual safe testing and knowing that these plants are truly Sensimilla and they're not hermaphroditic plants, I think that's the biggest issue, is having real quality and knowing what is inside and what is it we're purchasing. And I think that is the real issue with what JD was talking about, is that these plants are hermaphroditing and that they're not reaching their full senescence. So anyway, thank you for your time, guys. Please just do what we can to have patients be more connected to our plants. I think we're so detracted and we're so separated that we don't really know what we're getting until we get home. So if we can get more access, that would be awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And we have a Zachary case.
Hi, I'm Zach Chase. And what other question did I have to state something? Besides that, besides my name?
No.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just, it was interesting not being able to access, Utah cannabis yesterday or this last week and a half over the course of a few days. I'm not sure what's going on exactly, but what I want to get at is I really appreciate the quality of bud that I'm getting from these dispensaries. And it's actually pretty fire. And what I'm noticing, let's just say this, I can't say that I've ever, I'm not going to admit that I've used the black market, but if I ever did, maybe that bud some of it wouldn't be as good as some of this fire stuff that y'all are producing here. But people still don't have a lot of access rights, like Zach King was mentioning. I still can't go to the pharmacy, at 11 p.m. I still can't go at 7 a.m. We need hours of operation for medical needs for patients, whether they have seizures or whether they're, a veteran that has frightening dreams that are waking them up at 6 a.m. I want better business hours for access to my medicine. And like Zach said, a little bit more intimate detail of a closer relationship to the plant. And if these seeds are showing up, that guy was right. Why can't we plant them? Yeah, that's not something that obviously anybody has their mind in, for all the money to be made in marketing and keeping it in state, in-house. But if people can't access their medicine, there would have been a revolt. If this happened at Costco, if the EVS shut down, let's say Utah's version of whatever runs their pharmacies, there would have been a revolt. A bunch of old ladies trying to get their opioids. All the stoners and stuff. We're quietly asking to put a little more attention into helping us get better access. And I don't know exactly what the answers are, how that'll look, but let's open our minds and figure out ways to bridge and create new ways to, hear these answers instead of argue, or create new ways to really get to the consumer and make it easier for us to have a relationship with our medicine. And anyway, that's all I got to say. I appreciate you.
Okay, any additional comment from the public in the room?
That's a question. Yeah. Are we defining?
Make sure to introduce yourself.
There's certain maturity levels of seeds, like you could get a sample that might have premature white seed that may or may not in your testing protocol break or not. So are we looking at mature brown seeds that can be germinated and then grown? So to Jay's point, the concern of home grow, or is it more that we're seeing, like, are we seeing mature seeds, or are they premature seeds, premature seed pockets? Are they categorized all at once?
So the criteria that I would propose is if you can crush it into your fingers, and so it's just that fibrous material, not something that's starting to form in the seed, because there are, it's hard to tell along what path of development, how far along it is, without doing more investigation, and more investigation has cost of the price testing. And we don't want to influence that at all. If possible, we want to keep that point of testing where it is. So the simplest method is just that crush test.
So if the crush test it breaks, it's not considered foreign matter. If it refrains that, then it would be foreign matter. Yeah. Okay.
Make sure to sign in if you haven't already for the public comment, please.
If anybody else is planning on talking, can they come and sign in while they're?
Oh, yes, yes, we're gonna have plans to make a comment on this one, come Simon, or even if you plan to talk on something later, please do.
Just sign your name.
And you only just sign the one time, you don't have to sign it.
That's good comments. Justin Ariola, microbial processing with Hildebrand. One thing I would say is obviously patients don't want to be paying for totally for seed. On the other hand, when we talk about failing a product or seed, typically those numbers, like 1 or 2 seeds per made. I mean, if you were currently purchasing black. Compared to representative samples would be important before setting a number. The other thing that I would say is failing product for seed may potentially disqualify that product from being processed or moving through in a timely manner to process. So I know in working with some cultivators that have had seeded lots, I typically can process through that material without even, touching the seeded material by itself, right? If you're using a CO2 process, we can process the material. So when we talk about failing product for seed, let's make sure that we qualify that in a way that would still allow that product to be used and turned into product, whether it's extracted product or some other type of product that we can use or deal with that prevents potentially good product being failed from a seeded standpoint, allowing us to take that product in and then create products by process that would remove those seeds from the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not proposing at all that we destroy any product that could be usable, right? Or even allow remediation.
Right, but, or even if you have a failed for seed, like allowing that to potentially be moved into a processing facility for processing versus having to go through the 7 to 10 days to do the remediation for, and then have you guys do approval where we can, if you can have the process.
Yeah, it's with the failed product, it's failed and then they submitted a remediation plan. Because it was subjected for testing as a certain product,
Right.
it doesn't need to change, and remediation is. Maybe the definition doesn't necessarily, it's broad, but yeah, it does allow it to go on to, but you wouldn't do that unless it was failed. I think so, right, so if it's failed, there is that ability to remediate that.
Right, so instead of just remediating, it's just these and then passes for everything else and form material efficiency. And maybe it would be more cost effective for that cultivator or that microcultivator to be able to then give that product to the processor to deal with it instead of having to submit a remediation plan that will allow them to free that product up to conduct a transaction with some plans. So it's just from a time efficiency standpoint, maybe there's some clarification that we can put into the rulemaking so that it's not so burdensome to you guys or to the operators to be able to deal with the product in a way that, it's not gonna go on the shelf as a favorable product. But it can move through the system in a quicker manner and have a remediation.
So we'd have to make a more broad changes to allow for that, I think, than what we currently have in there, but we can look at it.
Have you guys had any input on that or something?
Yeah, so one of the other comments you made was comparable, right, like how many things are actually gonna fail with this, right? Based on our analysis of the data for things that are going through the lab, very few things would fail this criteria that we've established. Would you dispute that? But we're gonna be ending up failing more. It's not our intent.
No, I don't know that I would dispute, without being able to look through numbers, but it's just based on my history in this space. Finding a seed in a 3.5 gram sample isn't unheard of. And typically, we're also talking about assembling, but there are some cultivars, some strains that are a little bit more prone to that, but the benefits from those cultivars far outweigh the extra weight that we see in the place in the bag, meaning the terpene prevalence, some of the minor cannabinoids that are available to you would definitely offset the 1 or the extra seed that would be in the bag. And for me as a patient, I would definitely look at, hey, I'm willing to make that trade for those 1 or 2 seeds and being able to access this particular cultivar.
So you'll have to forgive me, I'm not as familiar with the terpene and cultivar stuff, but it sounds like the patient that commented, I think it was Zach, who was talking about the hermaphrodite plants. Sounds like he was saying the opposite of what you're saying, but was I misunderstanding his comment?
So typically, when we talk about hermaphrodites, that would be something that are coming from like an autocloud or, you know, they're bringing in seed and then working through. Generally, when you plant seeds, it's because it's received pollen from somewhere in the back, right?
Yeah.
And so as you're cultivating from a seed, you know, typically that first 7 to 10 days, you're going through there and you're looking at all of your representative samples to make sure that you're not seeing any seed pods develop. And so, patient sampling, you may have late stage pregnancy, what we consider, for females getting pregnant and starting to develop seeds. But they're developed enough that depending on what the cultivar is, you know, there are cultivars that are developing THCV. And so if you're taking THCV, it can be a kind of difficult cannabinoid to procure in certain cultivars. I would definitely trade that for an extra seed or two in the bag, being able to access that minor count. And so that's what I mean, when we look at sampling, I would hate to see us preclude certain cultivars, especially when we want to be proponents of the other minor cannabinoids and not just THC chasing. There are cultivars in the CBD cultivars as well that have some early origins on the side and can be a little more prone to seeding. And so just when we look at that number, you know, maybe that 1 seed per 3.5 isn't the right way to look at it. And I'm just putting facts out there so that we don't over regulate something that we may want to maybe excuses. I don't know what that number is, but I do know that there are cultivars that tend to have a little more prevalence. And typically, if you can find the right cultivar that you're chasing, that'd be something that you probably be okay with. If it has the other stuff that's there, you're.
I mean, that's not the feedback to get from patients. Patients are generally pretty upset when they find seed, at least the feedback that we get from them. They're not usually willing to trade any amount of the flower for seed.
Totally understand that, and I'll just full disclosure. When I have patients that are procuring high grade cannabis and they find a seed, in every other place besides this, probably there's a happiness there. You're gonna do something with it, right? So, that being said, obviously that's a paper seed, right? And if you're getting a least good product, that's gonna be a problem. I would also say that consumer demand is gonna drive some of that as well. So if they have a lot that's on the shelf that tends to have a few seeds in it, provided they can see that product and that's being disclosed, typically retailer would lower the price on that product in order to get it out, and that can also be a very beneficial way for patients to access cultivars that are at a lower price point because they're seeded. And everybody hears, I mean, anybody who's been in this space for a long time remembers the days of going through, you know, on a magazine and you're, you know, kind of grinding through your material and then you have a few seeds that roll out and you get rid of that stuff, and then everything that's left is great, right? And so again, depending on what those cultivars look like, and maybe an opportunity for retailers to be able to lower that product, maybe there's some creative solutions that would also offset price for patients and allow them to have access to cultivars that they wouldn't.
Any further public comment on this issue?
I think we have lots of them.
Yeah.
Will we try to limit it to things that have already been discussed?
Yes,
If you just say, hey, I second that idea.
Like never second thing.
We are second. Blake Smith, Scion Pharmaceuticals. First off, I actually like the clarification for rules, because when we don't have clarification for rules, the question always comes up, well, did you do it differently this time from next time? So generally speaking, I'm a fan of clarification for those types of things. My big concern, and there's no resolution to this today, but what happens when it passes the state and then it goes out? Because we go through a lot of work to make sure it's clean. The state goes through a lot of work to make sure it's clean. We're all on page, and then sometimes the system breaks. And usually industry gets thrown under the bus when that break happens. And so there has to be a better way to address that. What's the threshold? It can't be a single seed. Like, there has to be ways to codify what actually constitutes a recall versus not when a seed is found. I would say just generally for most processors and cultivators, we don't want seeds. We want to get the best quality. We try to do our best.
And, that's all I have.
It's great. So we can look at modifying the recall rule as well to.
If you'd like, I can speak to how we handle it. I know how you currently handle it. I think we should probably modify it. I don't want to know how we handle it. Because it's multiple tests afterwards, we won't do it based off of what is found on a complaint, or we go out to multiple locations and get multiple things, so it becomes, it looks like an ongoing problem versus a standalone. So.
Yeah, if a patient like provides us a sample that they found with a lot of seeds, we don't just fail everybody outright and recall immediately. We actually do go out and collect samples from preferably different pharmacies to get a good sampling of the batch to verify that there actually is a problem. We're really not out to punish producers who are trying to do a good job.
Hi, Eric with Dragonfly, second a lot of things that Justin said. In addition, a couple points just from an operator perspective. Understand weight. Nobody wants to get cheated on weight. At the end of the day, one seed is pretty negligible in weight, and my understanding of most of the operators that I know tend to overweigh their product just for those purposes, for purposes that we live in a dry climate, in case that product gets to them. So nobody from operator side is trying to obviously cheat any patients by sticking seeds in there. Secondly, really leaving that decision up to the patient as opposed to regulators. If a patient is dissatisfied with their product, most pharmacies stand behind the quality of their products and would gladly accept a return if a patient was dissatisfied. I don't know that anybody's come into our pharmacy to actually physically return a product with seeds. And it seems like lots of complaints from the outside, but those are things that absolutely, if somebody was dissatisfied and didn't want those, there are those concerns there, right? That absolutely a pharmacy would be able to mitigate. And the other point I want to make, which is related to what Justin has talked about in terms of cultivars, that there absolutely are genetics that are known for late-term herming. And it would basically, indirectly prevent people from wanting to also create those, because nobody wants to grow a batch of a great quality flower knowing that this is likely going to herm. So guess what? Patients will not ever get access to those types of cultivars from that perspective. And that in turn may create an unintended consequence of the cost of flower increase, because now you have an accidental batch that's seeded, because nobody is intentionally trying to put seeds into their flower. Now you got a whole entire room that just got seeded. Now you have less supply, demand relates to prices, right? So those could be impacted, especially when we're trying to lower the cost. And a great way to be able to lower the cost is to be able to grow products outside. Well, when you're growing outside, I sure don't have any control in whatever my neighbor might be doing and what he's growing in his backyard. That might unintentionally seed my entire field. And those things are things that, quite frankly, are sometimes out of control of producers, right? So those are some of the unintended consequences that might have by having a threshold that really is pretty much difficult to promise. Anybody who's gonna guarantee you that they will not have any seeds in any of their products is likely lying to you. And the last point that I'll make is the fact that here in the Utah market, we are a newer market that does not have access to breeders, to genetics here in the state. So the only really legal way to do that is to crack seeds. And when you crack seeds, those things happen all the time. We as operators spend a significant amount of money doing pheno hunting to help weed out some of these strains that do have late-term. So those are costs that already are baked in to the cost of product, because we have to do the searching to get the right genetics in that process. And that's some things that patients don't even know. There's a 6 to 12 month process before something even shows up on the shelf, right? So it's a long process. We're an early market still. So those are some challenges from a cultivation perspective that, quite frankly, are sometimes out of our control. So.
Thank you. Do you guys have any interest in raising the number of, I agree with Blake in the fact that I think having something in code, so we have, we have an idea of where, just a standard. But do you have any interest in raising that from 1? Because the idea of failing seed to me, like, is just a little bit rough, because.
And that's kind of why we brought it to the board. Like, obviously we're required to, but we really didn't come into this with a strong this will be one.
Yeah.
We came in looking for a recommendation from the board on where it's gonna be. So
Yeah.
if you guys can come to a number, we would appreciate that recommendation.
You
And
guys are
it
in
can
the
just be
space.
those two at the end.
Well, I mean, I could throw out a number, and when I've grown cannabis, which has been 0 times, I've had 0 seed, right? And so, I feel like I can adhere to the 0, no problem, but I'm interested to see what the people who are actually providing this medicine to patients. I have heard patients mirror some of that and say, yeah, I'll get a couple seeds, but this is what I love. I've never heard big complaints over too many. And so,
I guess we also gotta hear from the DPS and public safety side of this though, because there is concern for public safety when there's a lot of viable seed
Right.
getting out into the public. So it's not just patient getting value for money for their product. It's also protecting the public. We're gonna get pushback on the entire industry if suddenly there's a lot of home grows detected and the legislature starts hearing about it.
have there been more home growth since the program started?
I wouldn't have that data to be able to tell you, but I wouldn't suspect, no. But
So, and we've had the seeds from the beginning.
It's really only been since JD had the article come out about it.
Yeah, well, it was actually JD's idea from the beginning. We have some seeds.
I would say that what we hear obviously is the complaints, right?
Right.
The patients don't come to us and say, I have
The best,
no
yeah.
seeds, right? When it comes like, I have bought this flower product and had on seeds. So that's what that's what we're hearing, that thing. So, and obviously we're not hearing from all 60,000 patients or whatnot, but we're hearing enough of them there. And then the concerns overall, which was brought this up, was that the industry itself wanted that clarification, as Blake said, so.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I just think it should be a little bit higher than 1, but I don't know that I'm the one to decide that number. But I'll.
We are the ones to decide that number, but we want input from.
Yeah.
Well, here's at the end of the day is, anytime we can get clarification on rules on how we're regulated, makes specifically my job easier. And then I can hold my team accountable to make sure we're whatever process or policy it is that we have to adhere to is, we're following it, but. Advising 1 seed, as a grower, there's a lot of, I mean, people already talked about this, I don't need to bring it up, there's a lot of factors that why plants have seeds. Whether or not it's right or not, it's not for, we're just trying to grow, our goal is 0 seeds. We understand there's some genetics that just throughout the process, you try not to stress them or push them too long, but it doesn't matter, you're gonna get some seed, it just happens. And so through our quality assurance, when we are packaging, we try to find it, we try to mitigate that as much as we can. But again, that's a cost basis that it can get very costly, the more time you put into trying to separate those out. I think on a safety basis, that's really the only factor I can view, setting a number, whether it's how patients feel, the law enforcement, that side. As a cultivator in the state, we want a standard, and I don't know, I'm not in a position to say, hey, here's the number I'd like.
Well, it's kind of what you gotta do.
I know.
Yeah.
But what's an acceptable seed amount? I mean, right, that's what it comes down to.
I've been using.
Here.
Can I tell you my experience?
Well, we have a patient right here.
Can I tell you my experience? Okay, I've been buying flour for 3 years.
Guys,
I've been buying flour for about 3 years, almost December. And it's, when I find seed, it's multiple in one jar. It's not 1, it's not maybe 2, it's quite a few. So it's not every time, it's maybe every 6 months, if that. And I do buy a certain type of flour, so I could just be buying the type of flour that tends to have more seed. It's not ever been a problem. I catch them, I'm not, combusting them, but it is there. No. You know where I live, and you know what.
Right by my office, yeah. What's that smell?
Don't go to the next house. So what if we did like 3 seeds before a fail? Because I'm just throwing this out here, anybody can manipulate it. 3 seeds before a fail, And then let's just let like the market and patients
If
can
you can
decide like.
express that as a rate, that's how we're gonna have to do it in rural.
So have a
Three
percentage.
seats per
I didn't bring
patient or-
It'd be, well,
Yeah,
it'd be the same calculator, right? Right now, the calculation is 1 seed for every 3.5 grams, so it'd be 3 seeds for every 3.5 grams. Is if you're proposing 3.
sure. I'm not afraid. Throw it in.
Being tied in,
I
but-
think, yeah,
Wait, I'm sorry, can you clarify what it was you said you wanted to propose
just like three seeds per 3.5 grams.
for every 3 grams?
So it's my understanding that the number that you originally presented, the 1 for 3.5 grams, is what you tacitly have been operating on. It just wasn't explicitly expressed.
Yeah, we hadn't actually said any number.
Okay.
And the other laboratory does most of the testing, but based on that number, we would have failed very few products.
At
even
the
one.
one,
Yeah, the 1 seed.
okay.
So
Do we need to go to 3 or do we go to 2? Like if one's not gonna.
I would say, let's do, I want to see how many fail at 3. I want to see how many would fail at 1.
The same number that failed at 1 failed at 3. That's basically.
Really?
Like, there's probably a slight difference, but very broadly.
Well, then we can leave it at 3 and not really change much. So,
One factor I was thinking through is, Brandon, do you know what other states, and Cody, what other states have done on this?
We have looked into it pretty extensively and it varies. Some were very strict, like 0 seed, and others don't monitor it at all. Some
Yeah.
Consider it a separate form of foreign matter.
So it's all over the place. There's not a
Yeah,
trend.
I didn't notice a trend.
Okay.
Any further board discussion or public comment? Okay, we'll
think-
bring it back to the board for action unless, Missy, did you have something?
I think it'd be useful to hear what other states are actually doing, if that could be something that Trevor or Abigail could put together, just so we can see how other states are handling this. Might be beneficial.
Yeah,
And you could, maybe categorize it by medical only.
Yes.
Yeah, or maybe it's different for a medical program in Colorado compared to the rec program. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that we reached out to Canada to get some information, and I don't know if you have it or not, but one of the things that, to speak to the point that, to leave it to the patients, is that it seemed to be less of an issue in states where they could actually, look at flower at the dispensary at the counter, because they could inspect it, right, type of thing. Which, obviously that would lean to the market being able to get it. Right now, I'm not sure that the market could push that direct, because patients are being able to see it as well as they'd like to, and maybe don't have an actual good representation of all the product that's out there as well. You know, if you go to one pharmacy, you may not get the chance to look at them, so maybe some things to talk about in the future, as this goes on, but right now, I think that's one of the lead to market. That's probably the concern we see and what we hear about from other states, but, did you find the numbers on?
I did, the ones that Kyra sent us, there were only 2 responses from regulators in other states that were a part of Canada. And both of them were adult use and medical states. In California, they're included in the definition of cannabis, so there's no distinction from the rest of the flower. And is it in Montana? Okay, in Montana, it is 2% of seeds or other foreign methods. And they do have a stem limit as well, interestingly, 3 millimeters or wider.
Hey, Doug, for a second. Okay, well, I don't know how we want to handle this one, because this one seems like you've kind of come to a bit of an impasse in terms of the numbers. It sounds like you guys have tried to gather data from what other states are doing. I don't know if Trevor or Abby will have a better, opportunity to find that information. It sounds like the numbers being proposed are either the 1 that you all have come with, 2 or 3 at this point. obviously, you know, 3 is more than 1, 2 is more than 1, right? You know what I mean? But I don't know how people necessarily, feel, and if they want to take action. I don't know if there's more information to see out there. It may just be that we have to decide on a number. I'm hopeful though that some of the discussions that have been had about things that happen kind of after it passes initial testing, or what we might be able to do to remediate all of these things. Because I think it's just the idea of a total loss that I think, is probably most, concerning. And my comments regarding quality were not in terms of weight, but in terms of some of the other things that have been said, in the room. And it's, we don't want to take a total loss, but we also don't want to impact patients. We don't want to take money away from patients. We don't want patients spending money on seeds, all the things that have been said. So I don't know where it stands, as far as the board is, whether we feel comfortable saying yes to 1, 2, or 3 today. I don't know what more information we're going to necessarily get, so.
I'm personally a little afraid to just say a number right now. I would like to go do a little bit more research and ask patients if there's certain strains they're running into out of seeds, how many they're running into, what their problems is. I've had very few complaints to me about seeds. I hate just tabling every vote.
That's really why we brought this to you guys last time as well.
Yeah.
Tried to give you guys ample time to come forward and bring information.
One question on there, you mentioned California views it as seed is just plant matter. Is that not how it's defined in Utah?
No, it is included in the definition of foreign matter.
Foreign matter. What, do you know why that was initially defined that way?
Yeah, patient safety and also public safety.
And I believe still in the criminal code,
Criminal
the
code,
seed is still illegal.
That's correct.
Right. And we're just talking about admin rule that can be changed, right? It's just admin rule. And you're saying that realistically, one seed would have failed at 3 anyway, so the ones you're finding, you have a lot of.
Yeah, in general, we do find more than just a single seed. If they're gonna fail.
I can speak from what we've grown, and we've had genetics that we've started. And it looks fantastic, and as it goes along, we just scrapped the entire thing and went to extraction only. Because the seeds they're out of control. And you don't know until you grow it, and so you get a certain sample size to where it's all right, and it's not worth selling. But.
So, and I agree with Desiree where it's like, you get one random seed in there, then all of a sudden that spells, that seems to be kind of unfair. That's why I threw out the number 2, you know what I mean? Because then
to clarify, the minimum number of packages we're gonna collect of a 3.5 gram is 4. So it would have to be 4 seeds in those 4 packets.
Okay.
And that's the minimum. We usually collect 6 to 8.
Yeah.
Depending on the lot sizes.
Yeah, the number of seeds.
So, we didn't set this up to be overly hard.
I think if it's working at 1, we should keep it at 1.
Yeah.
But it's not, they're not making it fail at this point at 1.
Well, currently a single seed could fail the entire lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and full disclosure, we have that to 30 pounds trimming from 1 seed, and we don't want to risk potentially losing the entire batch.
So you mediated.
We, as an operator, make that decision and go to extraction. So already we're impacted by the fear.
Right, it's a risk.
Batch, potentially picking the wrong sample. It's random, but random is random, so.
Thank you for that.
Price of the industry, huh?
Yeah, so the industry, to be clear, they did ask for this clarification. It came to a head at the same time as patients being concerned about finding more seed, but it is industry that specifically asked for clarification.
Okay, well, I think we probably just need to pick a number. So I will entertain a motion from anyone that wants to make one, and we'll see if it passes or fails. Because we have other items on the agenda, and we'll be here till 7 o'clock if we don't start moving. So I think we need to pick a number. So if anyone would like to make a motion, please go ahead and do so.
Make a motion that no more than 2 seeds per 3.5 grams would be considered failure.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion to and a second to set the appropriate threshold for seeds in a 3.5 gram sample at 2. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have two opposed.
Three.
Three opposed.
I motion.
Yeah, so I mean, but that's, we need five, so we still have the five, so the motion passes.
Are we allowed to ask for comments from the people who opposed or?
Yeah.
Just move on?
I opposed.
We had 4 yes.
Yeah, we had 4 yes
And
and
4
4
yeses.
are
Nay.
yes, and we're missing a.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, don't we
So-
have 9 people?
But
We do,
we're
but
missing
Susan
the
Gilmore.
fifth, we're missing, number 9, Susan Jackson is not here, so the motion cannot pass.
And I think we opposed for
Motion
different
fails.
reasons, so
Yeah,
You wanted more?
I was gonna go for more, just to let the patients decide and not fail more product. And I think you wanted
Yeah.
less, and she wanted less, so now we have to arm wrestle.
Missing.
I was gonna say, I do have, I should have probably brought this up as we talked about failure before, so on my failure tracking log over since 2021. And this is not to say that there's not more than this, but based on this, it says seed specifically, in 2023 so far, it's been 2 failures, 2022 was 5, and 2021 was 1. So,
Okay.
total.
And that's single seed
Is
failures.
that, well, I don't
That's
have
not
it
bad.
says how many seeds are in it, I just.
No,
searched
there's at
my
least
term
one.
seed, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there might have been more that were just put on here as.
But then there's the companies that self-regulate
Yeah.
Right.
and decide if they find one, they're
So
changing
there's
the
been more
whole.
failures for Born
Yeah.
Matter, but those were the ones, those 7 or so were the ones that said seed specifically, so I mean, but it just depends on how it's reported to me. So.
So if we were to leave it at 1, are we at this time voting also on the process of them being able to take that product immediately and turn it into something else? This is just, yeah.
Well, we currently have that. in the
Yeah,
But they
that's
were
about.
saying that they wanted it cleaned up a little bit so it was faster.
It's relatively fast. I mean, once you get noticed of a failure, you get a form that's saying, hey, you had a quality assurance fail from the Department of Agriculture. I then have 7 or 15 days to reply to the Department of Ag with my remediation plan. And it's typically the same day that, and I believe it's Paula,
Yeah,
who does that, and she'll.
I do the approvals.
Yeah, that's,
So
it's almost the same day.
It just depends on if it's part of their operating plan, if there's any questions on how to mediate it. So.
It's just timing.
Katie, I do want to recognize we have one person on the line that would like to comment. They have posted about 40 messages.
Sure.
Would you like to recognize them?
sure.
Okay.
Happy to. Heard from everybody else and ended up with a failed motion, so.
Someone said throw a number out there.
That's what we have to do.
Again, I'll vote yeah.
Yeah.
We can revert.
Kieran or Corinne. So if you can hear me, we're gonna allow you to talk now.
Oh, okay, finally, I can ask a question.
Go ahead. Mary.
It's Shireen
Shireen.
And your last name?
Tawadi. I've been waiting to ask a question for about an hour now. I'd like to go back to when the board was giggling about combustion. I know that you guys go over a lot of policies. I think this policy about seeds is silly, since everyone can basically have seeds. You can get seeds and it's legal to have seeds. Anyway, my concern is, as a patient and combustion, this needs to be reviewed again by the medical association, by your board, by the legislation. I have multiple sclerosis, gastroparesis, asthma, a host of other autoimmune disorders. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, but I'm sure there are hundreds of other patients that are like me. I can't do edibles because of gastroparesis. Topicals don't work. Basically, the only thing that does work for me is combusting flour. for my chronic pain. People have been smoking cannabis for thousands of years. So I have no idea why Utah needs to reinvent the wheel when it comes to supplying medication to someone and the route that it gets to that person. If you guys need to maybe look at the policy on an individual basis, since you don't want to make a broad decision. But there are patients like me that can't take the mode that you guys are suggesting. Vaping some type of mixture of isomer soup that is in these vape cartridges literally makes me sick. I cannot do it. So that was my comment. I think it needs to be reviewed. And I'll yield my time.
Thank you. Shereen, we appreciate that. We will add that to an agenda for a future meeting. We have a few more things we have to discuss today, but we really appreciate the comments. Thank you. Okay, do we want to entertain another motion? Do we want to move on past this issue and come back to it again next month? How would we like to handle it? Okay, we want to, all right. I'll take another motion if someone would like to make one.
I'll make a motion to vote for 2 again. I'm gonna switch my vote.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion to the same motion that was made previously. It's been renewed regarding the amount of seeds that can appear in a 3.5 gram sample at 2. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay, now on to the second portion of this part of the presentation, which is regarding the artificially derived cannabinoids. Mr. Eckhoff has a presentation, and then we'll have board discussion and public comment.
Thank you, JD. We don't have an actual presentation up on the screen, but we were missing 3 board members last time, and this is coming back from our previous meeting, so I figured I'll give a brief overview of what was discussed then. Before I do, I'd like to acknowledge that Utah Patients Coalition has submitted a position letter for the board, as well as a patient's story about why Delta-8 THC specifically works for their medical condition and why it should remain in the program. So last time, and Abby, would you mind pulling up its link that at the top of the memo? Department of Ag's draft rule on what kinds of cannabinoids should be subject to certain limitations. And at the last meeting, the board primarily seemed to focus around whether or not Delta-8 THC should remain in the program, primarily because Delta-8 THC is subject to a lot of controversy nowadays, both in the cannabis market, but primarily in the hemp market. So this memo asks the board to answer the question if it believes the current rule from Department of Ag, which is no limit on Delta-8 THC, but it must achieve, and maybe you can help me with the technical language, Brandon, 5% margin of error within 95% purity. Or if Delta-8 THC should be limited to the proposed 2%, which I think is fair to say it's an effective ban in terms of not being able to create a Delta-8 THC specific product with it as the primary cannabinoid. But with that, I'm happy to speak about my memo. If there's any questions, lay out some of the research I did. I tried to provide some of the pros and cons that have been stated around Delta-8 use, but much of it's very anecdotal. I will say that there is no comprehensive study, whether by university or public health agency, that can determine whether or not Delta-8 THC is safe, whether because of it specifically or its presence as an artificial cannabinoid. But we do have 2 articles in this memo, one citing a study from earlier this year with some patients. I shouldn't say patients because this was actually in a not adult use state, and these people were not patients, but they used Delta-8 from the hemp market and reported using it for conditions such as chronic pain, panic attacks, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, stress, and nearly half of respondents reported using it for sleep. The primary reason seems to be that Delta-8 THC is less psychoactive than Delta-9 THC. For some patients, it may be a question of accessibility because you can buy a Delta-8 product almost anywhere. However, those tend to be the hemp products, right? But there are some patients, and again, the patient story that's submitted by Utah Patients Coalition does have a patient saying that Delta-8 THC works better for their condition, not only because it provides more anti-nausea effects for their gastrointestinal issues, but that also it has less psychoactivity, which is preferable for some who don't prefer a headache. But with that, again, I'm happy to continue to go throughout my memo. One thing I would like to mention is Mindy Madeo with Beehive Pharmacy brought to my attention that MCT oil is a common viscosity agent in Delta-8 THC vapes. So if the board considers continuing to allow Delta-8 THC in the program, it'd be advisable that there is a ban on MCT oil as a primary agent for that cannabinoid, given that there are some real cases of it being a public health concern, including the late study here. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and we'll turn it over to you, JD.
Thanks, Trevor. Appreciate it. I think I asked most of my questions during the last meeting, and I appreciate Brandon and Cody, both of you with your forthright answers. So if anybody else on the board has any additional questions or wants to have an additional discussion, ready to hear that now. If not, we'll move to public comment.
I will remind the board that the Cannabis Research Review Board did review the literature, the clinical literature on Delta-8. And the general consensus was that the literature at the moment cannot support a statement on efficacy of Delta-8 just because of the lack of controlled clinical trials. That being said, there is an ongoing, if you go to clinicaltrials.gov, there is a study currently enrolling patients to look at the that very topic, looking at the efficacy of Delta-8 THC versus placebo to evaluate the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of Delta-8 THC. So their primary completion is estimated for June of 2025. So we may have that data within the next year. That's something to keep in mind. So we may be revisiting this topic in the near future.
Thanks, Missy. Do we have anybody on any further board discussion before we open it up to the public?
I just want to make sure that everybody's aware too, that most of the studies or the information that we have at this point about Delta-8 and the complaints, nearly all of them that I'm aware of, come from the hemp market. It's hemp turned into Delta-8. It's not the way we're producing it in the medical cannabis program here in Utah.
Brandon, I did want to ask you guys, and Rich, you might be able to speak to this too, not just in relation to Delta-8. Obviously, we know those, what we're characterizing as the purely synthetic cannabinoids. I've not seen HHC and anything else in any actual medical cannabis product, right? So we're really talking about the limits in relation to Delta-6, 6A10A, and those different molecules as well as Delta-8. Are you guys aware of either reports to you or you found out otherwise adverse events with patients in Utah in relation to Delta-8, and the same thing for Delta-6A10A? Are you guys aware of any adverse
Not the
events?
patients directly, it's more on the hemp side that we hear reports of harm from Delta-8.
And when you're hearing though, even though that's on the hemp side, is that in relation to the product itself or maybe an adulterant in the product? Can you say whether it's the Delta THC, or excuse me, the Delta-8 that's actually causing the adverse event, or maybe an adulterant? Or
I don't think we could say that. We have got several of these products in for testing at the laboratory, and we've tested them and not found any other adulterants. But again, you have to be looking for the adulterant you're finding. So if they stuck an opioid in there, we were going to find it on our cannabinoid, right? But it does seem to be linked to the effects of the cannabinoid. They seem consistent with that. And sometimes it's just them not expecting to get high on a CBD gummy.
So maybe more of a labeling issue as opposed to the substance itself.
Yeah, in some cases.
But you haven't seen that in the medical market, those same types of complaints or adverse events?
Not in ours.
Not in our
There have
market.
been reports in other markets.
Right, we do have a comment online in the Q&A from Shelley Ulrich with Utah Patients for Cannabis and Natural Choices, and she's saying that patients in her group, as well as myself, are having a hard time with the extra added cannabinoids like Delta-8 being put in our medication because it changes the effects of that medication. Some of our patients that have used cannabis successfully for years are reported being knocked out and left lethargic with it. Yeah, that's at the very end there.
Any more comments from the board? Des, do you have anything else?
Didn't we move to label it's more, Delta-8s are more clearly labeled now as well, right?
Yeah, it has to be labeled as containing a synthetic.
You're right.
cannabinoid.
Yeah, that's under the artificially derived cannabinoid definition, which right now is, if the product contains it in any amount, it has to have the statement on it. If it has it above 1%, it has to have the potency. That's current standard, right?
Yep.
And so what this would do is essentially limit the amount, the potency that you could have in the product to 1% for our, I guess we can call it the Delta 6A, 10A, group of molecules, 2% for Delta 8, and then obviously a zero tolerance policy for substances you haven't even seen in the medical market. Those are much more, from the hemp market.
Correct.
Okay. That kind of gives the lay of the land for now, so.
But this
anything
one would
else from the
basically
board?
be a ban then.
Yeah, on the
So-
synthetic creation of Delta-8. Delta-8 does occur naturally in flower in small amounts, and we do see it occasionally in flower. It's not that unsurprising. That's why we set it a little bit higher at 2% because it is natural cannabinoid.
Right.
Okay, any more board discussion before we open it up to the public? Okay, we'll take public comment now. Yeah, I can't. Blake's, this is what Blake's been waiting for. Only 2 hours and 20 minutes in, my friend.
So a couple of things. Brandon, can you determine the difference between natural Delta-8 and synthetic Delta-8 in the laboratory?
Not with our current practices, that would be a lot more involved.
Right, so if something came in at 98% Delta-8, something came in at 0.5% Delta-8, you couldn't tell which one was plant derived versus not.
Correct.
The whole concept of this is Delta-8 is either medicine or it's not. If it's not, and it's not medicine, and it's unintentionally being created, should be banned. That, I mean, or 1%, I don't even care what percent, it doesn't really matter. It's not a medicinal product. But there is evidence, despite what I've heard, that shows that Delta-8 serves as a good antiemetic. It was actually used in the Gulf War. It was used for those that had rock gut and those that were eating too many MREs. US government did that, right? It was produced by Pfizer. So the idea is that Delta-8 is medicine, then there's a purity standard that already dictates it. Are you aware of any products right now in the market that are rife with Delta-8? No, none. It's produced for specific conditions, for specific patients as requested. And so the idea of banning it is a very weird concept to me, just because we're limiting medicine for patients by doing so. Literally, I think the purity standard is the most important part of this. When you go to the hemp industry and look at Delta-8, it is absolutely either intentionally created to try to get people high, that is, as was suggested in the text, a Frankenstein monster. You get so many peaks that you don't know what half the stuff is. But very intentionally created Delta-8 can be well above 95%. And I think Brandon would attest to that, in which case it is very intentionally being created for a very specific medical purpose. And so if a patient prefers that, then we should allow patients to have access to that medicine. I don't see why there's any difference in it. The last thing I would say is, I do have concerns about things that we don't know. So there is data, pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic data around Delta-8. We know that it's processed by the liver in P450. Your body treats it just like Delta-9. The biggest difference between Delta-9 and Delta-8 is It has a much higher Q log P value, and it gets absorbed cellularly in endocannabinoid receptor system 2 than endocannabinoid receptor system 1, which means it doesn't transition in the blood-brain barrier as long, which is why you don't get the psychoactive effect as strongly as you do with Delta 9. But because of that, you have higher receptor sites within the core of the system, which is why it has antiemetic properties, because ultimately what happens is you're getting your organs high. So you're masking any of the other conditions for IBS, colitis, some of these other things, which is why it has that purpose. So the only thing I would say is don't limit medicine. If it's medicine, give it a purity standard. I think the one that Brandon's already created is good. There are almost no producers of Delta 8 in the medical industry as it is right now. It's only produced on special request for specific patients anyway. So limiting that seems silly, from my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Blake. Apologize for JD, had to step away for a moment. He'll be back shortly, but I think the last meeting, for those of you who weren't here, we did talk, there was more than just one proposal of this. I mean, we talked about just, I mean, when it came to D8 specific, I think the Delta 6, Delta 9, or Delta 10 were always limited to the 1%. The Delta 8, there was the other option that was brought to the board was at a 95% purity level.
That's already is.
And that's in there. I think as far as kind of my side and looking at it, I don't think there's anything wrong with our board acknowledging that if it's not a 95% pure, then there is a limited option. I mean, is it possible to do both ways? Because I don't think you want inadvertent D8 to minimizing it, but if it's a pure that's brought in, and any oil, just so those understand, that's brought into the market, all the oil is tested before it's actually introduced into any product. And I think ultimately that's where it needs to be, have the purity, not in a finished product side, because you need to be able to formulate and make certain things. So if we're looking at the D8 as on the bulk oil side, or that's kind of where I think this rule should be taken into account. So.
Okay, any further board discussion?
I'm sorry, can I make one more comment?
Yeah,
I'll run
please.
back over here. This is just a comment about D10 and D6. If somebody wants to claim they have a medical benefit, like I really get my, toe pain fixed by Delta 10. This sets a way for us to actually have a standard for that too. I'd love somebody to go produce 95% pure Delta 10 and use that as a medication. I have yet to see anyone do so. I've not seen that. I've not seen it in the market, but people aren't making medical claims about Delta 10, Delta 6, or HHP, or any of these other crazy things that are out there. So if you can make it really pure and demonstrate that it's safe from a toxicity perspective and show that it's efficacious, then that should be allowed too, ultimately. But you need those qualifications to do so. And because it's a chimeric molecule, I find it highly unlikely somebody will be able to hit that, but I'm open to the idea that somebody's magical. So.
We do have reasonable monitoring.
Certainly, and I think one thing we do want to clarify, right, is that the discussion around the 95% purity versus the limitation we're going to place on the potency within the product may not necessarily be the exact same discussion. What we're talking about here today, although that's a good discussion to have, what's being proposed is they're going to place absolute limits on the potency in products, right? 1% for the Delta 6A 10A molecules, 2% for Delta 8, and those other cannabinoids that we spoke of that have never appeared, as far as I'm aware, and Brandon can speak to this as well, in a medical cannabis product, those will have a zero tolerance. So that's really what the board, is being asked to take, action or not on today. So I just want to make sure that we're bringing it kind of back to center here, because these other discussions are worth having. But really the question is, do we want to impose these limits or recommend that these limits be, imposed? So with that in mind, there are folks online that want to speak to that specifically, whether we should, be advising on the limits proposed. Definitely happy to hear that.
We have two with their hands still raised, Jake Garn and Zach. So Jake, if you want to go first, and then Zach.
I love you guys. Apologies for my earlier outburst. I think you guys are all doing the hard work. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I second what Blake is saying. I think patients need to absolutely be protected from 100% of any chemical derivatives. If you shouldn't try to limit what type or what flavor. If there's this many, it's 100% ban across the marketplace. If we can't protect patients with safe products, I get that there's a lot of requests for safety tests and stuff before we allow patients full access to this, but then to test chemical experiments on them at the same time, it's just disingenuous to the earlier statement that more testing about this needs to be happening before they can touch the plant, use the leaves in the salad, use the roots in their tea, experiment with the amount of the seeds, use that these genius caretakers of the plant are learning themselves. The patient should all have access to this knowledge. These guys are doing the hard work. You guys are doing the hard work. The patients should be doing the hard work and reporting what they find alongside of you. This plant is safe. We know it. We know it. Everybody knows it. Our neighbors know it. Hawaii knows it. Oregon knows it. Washington knows it. Nevada knows it. Colorado knows it. Arizona knows it. We all know it. The patients know it. Inserting chemical experiments in front of them and saying that, those are safe, but they can't have plants and touch and feel. That's too dangerous. It's just disingenuous. The plant is safe. Give more access to the plant. Limit all access to 100% of them to the chemical derivatives. If DH showing naturally up, great. The patients are probably benefiting from it. If it's showing up unnaturally in any percentage, bad. We need to protect the patients from that at all costs. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jake. Zach, go ahead.
Hey guys, thank you. I just wanted to say my own personal experiences. I have tried Delta 8, both in the market here in the Utah cannabis field as well as the hemp areas. I've had negative and positive experiences, and my only issue is just like Jake stated, what happens naturally in the plant, we know doesn't have an LD50 that's been established, whereas with these chemical reactions, we are not sure of any heavy metals that may or may not be there. I'm more than happy for the board to do research and to have all these producers show us the way it's done. But until then, I just strongly encourage the board and everyone else to keep the raw plant material, and the less hands that touch this plant, the better. The more live resin, the more live products that we have, meaning that the terpenes are fresh and that the plant is fresh. I get really, really nervous when we have people with very sensitive autoimmune conditions, when we're basically played as guinea pigs and we're trying to figure it out. And I love that the research is being done. I think that's awesome. But right now we have, like Shireen said, we have thousands of years of actual combustion or utilizing dryer vaporizers of their actual flower. That's what I need. I wish I could afford my 4 ounces of flour. I can't afford it. I think we need to get back to the real issue, which is the access to the medicine, and we're not getting that. And Delta 8 is a great avenue possibly, but let's stick with what we do know for now. And then we can eventually, once we have the solid science, we can say, because of what we started, we have something we can rely upon. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your comments, Zach. I think with that, unless there's any additional comment in the room, we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the board for potential action.
I just want to say quickly, I mean, we wrote a statement letter from UPC saying our support in keeping Delta 8 in the program, which would be, a vote no on this. We did get one letter. I could have gotten more, and I didn't, because I think the one lady that I reached out to, she said everything that needed to be said. And when we created this program, I think it's very important to remember that we didn't create this for the entire state. We created this for a very small amount of people. Delta 8s serve a very small amount of people. They're not used, they don't create the head high that a lot of people, look for when they're, treating pain or PTSD or something like that. they have a very specific reason, and it's usually to stop nausea. Or stomach pain. The lady that wrote the letter did not want to sign her name. And I am fine with that, but she was passionate about it because if she does not take this, she will probably die. Delta 9s she does not like a head height. It doesn't seem to leave her body as fast as it does everybody else's. We don't know if it's a metabolism issue or whatever, but Delta 8 seem to be the thing that have kept her alive for the last couple of years and allowed her to get rid of the stomach cramping. She has not eaten in 5 years. So keeping an inhalation route is important. So before we say we don't feel comfortable with something that is appearing in levels that wouldn't be natural. I have to defer to Blake at that point, because when I went to Blake and said, I have this patient, what can you do to help me? He said, try this. And she tried it and her life turned around. I'm never going to vote to take that away. I don't care if you come out and say that it's dangerous, as long as it's labeled and it's keeping her alive for now. I'm going to vote to keep it for her, just like we did for the program. This isn't for everybody. This is for specific people. We can't prove everything until we have the ability to test, but we can prove that there are a couple people that require this. We have went above and labeled it so people aren't running into this on accident anymore. And I think right now we're in a really good place where the people that need it can find it. They usually have to request it. It's not easy to find. And the people that want to avoid it are able to do so if they are able to read the product labels before they purchase it.
So do we think it's maybe possible to not touch the Delta 8 or even the Delta 6A, 10A issue, but at least say those other, truly synthetic cannabinoids that are not appearing in medical cannabis products, that we would be in support of a ban for those?
Yep.
Okay. Look, we got some consensus, everybody. Good deal. Well, I would be willing to entertain that type of motion at this point. And obviously, of course, knowing we can come back and revisit this, the way the law is currently set up, patients are all being, notified of what is in their products, whether on the label, on websites. If you come to our pharmacy, I'm sure if you go to Dragonfly, you go to Beehive, you will be able to get this information of what's in your product. It is on the label. It is not being, put forth on the label. So with that said, if someone would like to make a motion, I'm all ears. Do I make the motion?
Just make the motion.
Yeah.
Okay, I will make a motion that we recommend that to basically support the total ban on the certain cannabinoids, and Brandon, I'll actually probably have you read them off if you can. We support a total ban on those in medical cannabis products, knowing that they have not shown up yet in a medical cannabis product in Utah, I do believe.
Hexahydrocannabinol or HHC, tetrahydrocannabinol acetate or THCO acetate, and 3-hetyl delta 1 tetrahydrocannabinol or THC.
Okay, do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion pending to recommend an absolute ban on the crazy alphabet soup that Brandon just read off. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, we are at a place, we're about 40 minutes beyond where the meeting was supposed to end. We do have a couple more agenda items. One will be pretty extensive if we want to get to it. If not, we can adjourn and take it up at the next meeting. But please, for the board members, please let me know if you'd like to continue on and go through the rest of the agenda. If not, we can table these items for next month's meeting. So just let me know when
I can go till 5.
Okay.
I'm fine to stay.
Yep.
I'll stay till midnight.
Same.
If we
And I
did
actually,
wanna-
I have
sorry, Emily.
another obligation. Yeah, I have another obligation at 5, and so I will have to end at that time.
I also,
Okay.
the Zoom call is gonna end in like 6 minutes.
So you can start over.
So, yeah.
Or you'll lose that.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you all. We might be able to do the pharmacy ownership cap in 20 minutes. That's not a cap on the number of pharmacies that will be owned. Just to be absolutely clear with everyone, That is to essentially prevent a monopoly. A number, a strata of numbers have kind of already been presented by lawmakers. I imagine we'll net out somewhere there. Maybe we can at least start that discussion, knowing we will have to end at 5. I do believe, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on who you are, medical cannabis, delivery expansion will probably need to be tabled to next month, because that conversation will last as long, if not longer, than the conversation we've currently had. So let's go ahead and
Just a second, JD.
When you done at 4:45, it's gonna call.
The Zoom will end.
Okay, Zoom in, so we can't even go. So honestly,
Let's just
Yeah.
call it a draw.
yeah. Yeah, it might just be a good idea that these will be the first 2 items on the agenda for next month's meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, I will take the most popular motion of the day.
Motion to adjourn.
It is not debatable. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. So Desiree, I was gonna be, the medical marijuana conversation longer.
Oh my God.
But it got so busy, but anyway, so, hey, I'm reading on the next.
Yeah.